Get into the truck, Carson said, and he didn't recognize his own voice, low, flat, and absolutely certain. Get in the truck, right now. The old woman stared at him from the dirt blood running down her temple, one eye already swelling shut. The man standing over her hadn't noticed Carson yet. He would in about 2 seconds. Carson didn't wait. If you've never seen a 19-year-old farm boy from Iowa make the worst and best decision of his life, at the same time you're about to. Before we go any further, if stories like this one move you, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that cornfield. The drive back from Henderson's feed store was supposed to take 22 minutes. Carson Ward had made that drive so many times in his 19 years that he could do it half asleep, which was almost exactly the condition he was in when his headlights caught the guardrail first, then the tire tracks in the gravel shoulder, then the rear end of a dark sedan sitting at a hard angle in the drainage ditch off County Road 7. He almost kept driving. That's the honest truth of it, and Carson would admit it later without any shame. It was 11:40 at night. He'd been up since 4 in the morning running irrigation lines in the south field. His shoulders ached in the way that only comes from 8 straight hours of physical labor, and his father had left the porch light on, which meant dinner was cold, which meant all Carson had to do was get home. He almost kept driving. But the car was at a wrong angle, not the kind of angle a driver puts a car when they pull over to check a map or take a phone call. It was the angle of a car that had gone off that road fast and not by accident. The rear passenger door was hanging open, and there was a light on inside. Carson pulled his truck onto the shoulder and sat for a moment with the engine running. He was not a reckless young man. He was by most measures exactly the opposite methodical quiet, the kind of kid who double-checked gate latches and kept a first aid kit under the seat because his father had taught him to be ready for what the land threw at you. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove box, left the truck running, and walked toward the car. The ditch was steep enough that he had to plant his boots sideways going down. The grass was wet from the afternoon rain. He could smell the engine hot metal, a little smoke not burning, but recently worked hard. He shone the light through the rear window first. The back seat was empty. He moved around to the open door. The interior light was on. There was a woman's shoe on the floor, just one. A small flat shoe, the kind an older woman wears. There was a broken pair of glasses on the seat. There was blood on the headrest. Not a lot. Enough. Carson straightened up and listened. That's when he heard it, not loud, not close, but unmistakable in the flat quiet of an Iowa night. A voice, a woman's voice, coming from somewhere past the tree line at the far edge of the drainage basin, maybe 60 yards off the road. He stood there for 3 full seconds, making his decision. Then he went. He moved along the tree line rather than through the open ground, not because he had any training in that kind of movement, but because it was the same instinct he used when he was trying to get close to deer in the east pasture, slow parallel, using whatever was between him and the thing he was approaching. The ground was soft under the trees. His boots made almost no sound. He kept the flashlight off. He heard the woman's voice again, closer now, and this time he could hear what she was saying. She wasn't screaming. She was talking low-controlled with an edge in it that didn't sound like fear so much as fury held very tightly in check. "You don't know what you're doing," she said. "You genuinely do not understand what you are doing." A man's voice answered her, flat-bored the voice of someone who'd stopped listening to the people he was handling a long time ago. "Lady, I need you to be quiet." "I will not be quiet. And when my son finds out about this..." The sound that came next was a short, sharp crack. Not a gunshot, a slap. Hard enough that Carson heard it from 15 feet away through the trees. He stopped breathing. "I said quiet," the man said. Carson came around the last tree and saw them. There were 3 men. 2 were standing near a second vehicle, a black SUV engine running backed up into a clearing that was barely visible from the road. The third man was standing directly over a woman who had fallen to her knees in the mud. She was older, Carson would have guessed, late 60s, maybe 70, with silver hair that had come loose from whatever she'd had it pinned in and was hanging around her face. She was wearing what had been a nice blouse. It was torn at the shoulder. She had one shoe on. She was bleeding from her lip. She was looking up at the man standing over her with an expression that was not fear. It was cold, absolute contempt. "Get up," the man said. "No," she said. Carson looked at the 3 men. He looked at the woman. He looked at the SUV, specifically at the open rear cargo area where he could see rope, a duffel bag, and a roll of plastic sheeting. He understood what he was looking at. He looked down at his own hands. He was holding a flashlight. In his truck, 60 yards back, he had a tire iron, a length of chain, and a box of tools. He had no phone signal. He had no backup. He was 19 years old and he weighed 180 pounds, and he had spent his life moving hay bales and fixing fence lines, and he was by any reasonable measure not equipped for what was in front of him. He made his decision in less than a second. He turned and ran back toward his truck. Not away, but back, because he needed what was in the truck bed. He moved fast and low, and the soft ground helped him. He got to the truck, dropped the tailgate as quietly as he could manage, and grabbed the one thing that had been there since last Tuesday when he'd been cutting back the old fence row along the north property line, a heavy-handled brush hook. 36 inches of wood and steel curved blade on the end balanced for swinging. He also pulled the coil of tow chain off the hook on the side of the bed. He went back through the trees. The situation had shifted in the 2 minutes he'd been gone. The woman was on her feet now, but only because one of the men had hauled her up. He had her by the upper arm, and he was walking her toward the back of the SUV. The other 2 men were moving to close the cargo door. Carson didn't give himself time to think about it again. He came out of the trees at a dead run, and he swung the brush hook at the hand of the man holding the woman, not the blade, the wooden handle with every pound of force his body could generate from a full sprint. The crack of it connecting with the man's forearm was loud enough to startle all 3 of them into a frozen moment, and Carson used that moment. He grabbed the woman by the hand and pulled her sideways toward the tree line, away from the SUV. The man he'd hit was on the ground making a sound that wasn't quite language. The other 2 were already moving. Carson said, not loud, just the one word directed at the woman, and she ran. She was fast for a woman her age. Carson registered that in some distant part of his mind as he kept himself between her and the 2 men coming after them. He swung the chain out behind him, not at anyone, just to make them stay back, to give himself distance, and they crashed into the corn together, the woman and the farm boy leaving the clearing, and the black SUV, and the 3 men, and the open Iowa road behind them. The corn was head-high and dense. Carson knew corn. He had grown up in corn. He knew how to move through it without getting turned around, knew which direction the rows ran, knew that the rows on this field ran east, northeast, which meant if he kept perpendicular to them, he was going north, which meant he was going toward home. He pulled the woman with him, and they moved. Behind them, flashlights cut through the stalks. He could hear the men following, crashing, not careful, angry, and probably not thinking straight. One of them was calling out not to him, but to each other, short directional words that told Carson they were trying to flank him. He changed direction, cut hard right down a row, then cut left again after 50 yards. The woman was breathing hard, but she hadn't said a single word. She just ran where he pulled her. Then he heard the second vehicle, not the SUV, a different engine lower coming from the direction of the road. Headlights swept across the top of the corn in a wide arc. A door opened. More voices. Go, Carson said. Straight, don't stop. Where are we going? The woman said. Her voice was ragged from running, but still had that same edge in it. My house, Carson said. It's about a quarter mile. She didn't ask anything else. She ran. William Ward was 54 years old and had been farming the same 400 acres his father had farmed before him. He was not easily rattled. He had pulled a tractor out of a sinkhole, weathered 2 floods, in a drought buried a wife, and raised a son alone, and he had never once in his adult life called anyone for help with anything if he thought he could handle it himself. When the back door of his farmhouse flew open at midnight and his son came through it, pulling a bleeding stranger by the hand, William set down his coffee mug slowly, the way a man does when he is deciding how calm to be. Dad, Carson said. I see her, William said. Sit her down. The woman sat. She was catching her breath, both hands flat on the kitchen table, and even in that state, she was looking around the room with quick, assessing eyes, checking exits, checking windows, taking inventory of what was around her. William noticed that. He brought a dish towel and ran it under cold water and handed it to her without saying anything. She pressed it to her lip. Thank you, she said. You want to tell me what happened? William said, directing this at Carson. Carson told him. He told it fast and straight, without any elaboration. The car in the ditch, the 3 men, the woman on her knees, the run through the corn. The second vehicle. William listened. He didn't interrupt. When Carson finished, William looked at the woman. You have family we can call, he said. No police, she said. The way she said it wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. It was the way a person says something when they know things about the world that most people don't. William met her eyes. I wasn't going to call police. Something shifted in her expression, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. I need my phone, she said. Do you have a phone that works here? Landline in the hall, William said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood, pressed the towel to her lip one more time, and walked into the hall. Carson started to follow, and his father put a hand on his shoulder. Let her make her call, William said quietly. Who is she? Carson said. We're going to find out. They heard her dialing not a short number, a full 10 digits, and then a pause. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The controlled fury was still there, but something else was underneath it now, something that Carson would later try to describe and only ever land on one word for power. Alonzo, she said, it's your mother. I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you to not do anything until I finish speaking. A pause. I'm safe. A young man helped me. I'm at his family's farm. I'm going to give you the address. She turned and looked at Carson through the doorway. What's the address? Carson gave it to her. She repeated it into the phone. Another pause. Longer. Yes, she said. All of them. She hung up. She came back into the kitchen and sat down at the table again and looked at the two ward men standing across from her. She looked at them the way a person looks at two people they are about to tell something that will permanently change what those people understand about the world. My name is Brooke Mendoza, she said. The name meant nothing to William. It meant nothing to Carson. She could see that. My son is Alonzo Mendoza, she said. He leads the Midwest chapter of the Hells Angels. The kitchen was very quiet. William reached for his coffee mug. It was empty. He set it back down. All right, he said. The men who took me tonight weren't random, Brooke said. She was speaking with complete composure now, the shock of the last hour packed away somewhere internal, her mind clearly running at full speed. They were sent. There's a man named Carver. He's been trying to establish a supply route through this county for the better part of 2 years, and my son has been the primary obstacle to that. Tonight was not a robbery. Tonight was leverage. She paused. I don't think they intended to kill me. I think they intended to use me. Use you for what? Carson said. To make Alonzo step back, she said, or to make him make a mistake. She looked at Carson directly. You saved my life tonight. Not because they would have killed me quickly, they wouldn't have, but because of what would have happened during the time between when they took me and when they used me, and what would have happened to my son afterward. Carson was quiet for a moment. How many are coming? He said. She almost smiled. All of them, she said. It was William who thought of the car in the ditch. We should move it, he said, or at least make sure it's not traceable back here before morning. It was already in the ditch when I found it, Carson said. They ran her off the road. The men who were chasing you, William said, they know which direction you went. Brooke was already nodding. They'll know it was a farm. There aren't many between County 7 and here. How long until your son arrives? William said. It depends on where he was when I called, Brooke said. It could be 2 hours. It could be less. William looked at his son. Carson looked at his father. Between them passed one of those wordless conversations that only happen between people who have lived in close quarters with each other through hard years, a full exchange compressed into about 2 seconds. All right, William said again. He went to the cabinet above the refrigerator and took down a box and checked what was in it and put it back. Carson, you're going to stay here with Mrs. Mendoza. I'm going to go check the road. Dad, I'm not going to do anything, William said. I'm going to check the road and come back. He went out the back. Brooke watched him go. She turned back to Carson. Your father, she said. He's a careful man. Yes, ma'am. That's a rare thing, she paused. What made you stop? Carson thought about it. The shoe, he said. What? There was one shoe in the back of the car. I saw the shoe and I understood what that meant. He paused. My mother died when I was 11. Accident on the county road. I remember being at the scene after the things that were just left there. He stopped. I saw the shoe and I understood what it meant. Brooke was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about your mother, she said. Thank you. She looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were scraped. She had mud on both arms from where she'd fallen. She looked up again. Carson, when my son gets here, when all of them get here, I want you to understand something. What you did tonight is not a small thing to us. It is not the kind of thing we repay with a thank you and a handshake. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Not entirely, Carson said. You will, she said. They sat in the kitchen of the Ward farmhouse, and they waited. Outside, the Iowa night was heavy and still. Somewhere out on County Road, 7 headlights moved slowly in the dark. William Ward walked the fence line with his flashlight off, listening. And somewhere on the highways feeding into that county, from 3 directions, headlights were multiplying. William came back inside at 12:40 and said nothing for a moment, just poured himself a glass of water and drank half of it. They're not on this road yet, he said, but there's a truck parked down by the Henderson intersection with its lights off, hasn't moved. They're watching the road, Carson said. Watching and waiting, William agreed. He looked at Brooke. They may not know exactly which farm. They'll figure it out, she said. Men like Carver are patient right up until they're not. Once they realize they've lost me, really lost me, not just running through a cornfield, lost me, they'll start systematically checking every farm within a 2-mile radius. How much time does that give us? Carson said. Maybe an hour, she said. Maybe less. And your son, William said. She glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. Less than that if everything went right. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Carson got up and went to the window and looked out at the darkness. He was not afraid, or rather he was afraid, and it was sitting in his chest like a weight, but it wasn't the kind of fear that made his hands shake or his thinking go soft. It was the kind of fear that sharpened everything the way cold air sharpens a morning. He thought about the man's arm when the brush hook handle had connected with it. He thought about the sound. He thought about the plastic sheeting in the cargo area. Mrs. Mendoza, he said, still looking out the window, can I ask you something? Yes. The man who took you, the one they call Carver, is he going to come here himself? Carver doesn't come himself, she said. He sends people. But if I'm here and I'm not retrieved by morning, he'll know those people failed. And then he'll want to understand why. And then he'll come, Carson said. And then he'll come, she confirmed. The clock on the wall said 12:53. William refilled his water glass. Carson came back to the table. Brooke Mendoza sat with her hands folded in front of her bleeding lip and torn blouse, and one shoe, looking for all the world like a woman who had been in difficult rooms before and had walked out of all of them. You keep looking at the window, she said to Carson. I'm waiting, he said. For what? He thought about it. I'm not sure yet, he said honestly, but I'll know it when it comes. She nodded slowly. That's exactly the right answer, she said. At 1:14 in the morning, the truck at the Henderson intersection turned its lights on. William, who had gone back outside to watch from the tree line, came inside quickly and said, It's moving. Toward us, Carson said. Toward us, William said. Brooks stood up from the table without hesitation. Carson stood. William moved to the cabinet above the refrigerator again. The truck on County Road 7 was moving slowly, not fast, the way someone comes when they know exactly where they're going and want to arrive quietly. Carson could see the headlights now through the kitchen window, moving along the road, slowing at every farm entrance, a predator checking each door in a long corridor. It had reached the 3rd farm south of theirs. Then Carson heard something else. Low at first, so low it was more of a sensation than a sound of vibration that he felt through the kitchen floor before he heard it with his ears. His father heard it too, because William turned from the window and looked at his son with an expression Carson had never seen on his father's face before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was awe. The sound built. It built the way a thunderstorm builds when it's coming from far away. And there's nothing between you and it, a low, continuous roar that separated itself as it grew closer into individual components. Each one the sound of an engine, and there were so many of them layered together that they ceased to sound like individual things and became instead a single massive living sound. The headlights hit the corn first, then the road, then the truck that had been moving slowly toward their farm. The truck stopped. Brooke Mendoza was standing in the kitchen of the Ward farmhouse with her hands at her sides and her chin up and the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth That was not quite a smile and was not quite satisfaction, but was something that lived between those two things. "There they are," she said quietly. Carson Ward stood at the window of his family's farmhouse and watched the highway fill with lights. Not dozens of lights, not hundreds. The road from the horizon to their front gate was a river of headlights, 2 columns wide, moving in perfect disciplined formation, and the sound they made together was the kind of sound that gets into your chest and stays there. The truck that had been creeping toward the Ward property from the Henderson intersection sat motionless on the road, and Carson could not see its driver. But he imagined what that driver was seeing and feeling and thinking in this moment, and he understood why the truck didn't move. He understood why it would not move for a very long time. The formation slowed, it arranged itself. Along the highway, bikes lined up with a precision that was almost ceremonial. Engines idled down one by one until the roar became a rumble, became a hum. A single set of headlights separated from the formation and turned up the Ward driveway. Carson's father put a hand on his son's shoulder. They went outside. The man who got off of the motorcycle at the end of the Ward driveway was large, genuinely large, the kind of large that isn't just height or weight, but presence. The way some people take up more space in a room than their physical body accounts for. He was wearing a cut and a leather vest covered in patches, and his face was hard in the way that a face gets hard when it has absorbed a long time of difficult things. His eyes were dark, and they went to his mother first, and something moved through them that Carson, watching, recognized without being able to name. It was the look of a person who has imagined the worst thing happening and has arrived to find the worst thing did not happen and is still processing the distance between those two realities. Alonzo Mendoza walked to his mother. He put both hands on her face gently, the way you hold something that you know is strong, but that you also know is not indestructible. He looked at her lip. He looked at her eye. He looked at the torn blouse and the one shoe. He turned to look at Carson. Carson was 19 years old and standing in his driveway at 1:30 in the morning, and he had a brush hook somewhere in a cornfield and a coil of tow chain in his truck and dried mud on both boots. And the man looking at him was one of the most powerful figures in the Midwest criminal underground, with somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people sitting on the road behind him. Carson met his eyes. Alonzo Mendoza held that gaze for a long moment. Then he did something that Carson had not expected, and that he would spend a very long time afterward trying to understand. He went down on one knee. Not both knees, one knee, the way a man kneels when he is making a vow. He looked up at Carson from that position, and his voice when he spoke was quiet enough that only Carson and William could hear it. "You put yourself between armed men and my mother," he said. "You brought her to safety. You stayed with her until I could get here." He paused. "I am in your debt. My brothers are in your debt. The debt we owe you is not something we are going to forget." Carson had no script for this moment. He had grown up on a farm in Iowa, and his father had taught him to work hard and tell the truth and look people in the eye. And none of that had prepared him for a man like Alonzo Mendoza, kneeling in his driveway in the dark. He said the only honest thing he could think of. "I just stopped when I saw the shoe," he said. Alonzo looked at him. "I stopped because I knew what it meant," Carson said, "and I couldn't keep driving, that's all." Alonzo stood. He looked at William Ward, who had been standing slightly behind his son, and who now met his eyes without flinching. "Your son," Alonzo said. "My son," William confirmed. "You raised him right." William Ward said nothing. He nodded once. That was enough. Brooke Mendoza came forward and put her hand on her son's arm and spoke quietly to him in a voice too low for Carson to hear. Alonzo listened. His face changed as he listened, not softened exactly, but resolved the way a face looks when a person has been given information that tells them exactly what the next step is. He turned back to Carson. "We need to talk," he said, "about what happened tonight. All of it. Everything you saw, everything you heard." He paused. "And then we have some work to do." Carson looked at his father. William Ward looked at the 2-mile line of headlights sitting on the highway outside their property, and then looked at his son and said, "Put the coffee on." Carson made the coffee the way his father had taught him, strong, no ceremony enough for whoever showed up. He didn't know how many people that would be. He filled the largest pot they had and set it on the stove and stood there for a moment with both hands on the counter, looking at the kitchen that had been just a kitchen 2 hours ago and was now something else entirely. Alonzo Mendoza sat at the Ward kitchen table like a man who had sat at 1,000 tables in 1,000 houses and had always been the most dangerous thing in the room. He didn't fill the space aggressively, he just filled it completely. His hands were flat on the table, his eyes moved between Carson and his mother with the quiet efficiency of someone running constant calculations, threat assessment, information gathering, next step planning, all of it happening behind a face that showed almost nothing. Two other men had come inside with him. They stood near the back door, not sitting, not speaking. Carson had not been introduced to them, and he did not us. He understood instinctively that they were not there for conversation. Brooke had accepted a glass of water and a clean cloth for her lip and had refused everything else. She was sitting straight back at the table across from her son, and she had, in the space of the last 20 minutes, completed some internal transformation that Carson could see but not fully explain. The woman who had run through his cornfield breathing hard one shoe blood on her face was still present in the physical details. But the person sitting at the table now was someone who had absorbed all of that and filed it away and was already operating several steps ahead of the current moment. Alonzo looked at Carson. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start with what made you stop." So Carson told it again. The drive home, the car in the ditch, the shoe, the three men in the clearing, the brush hook, the cornfield, the second vehicle, the run. He told it the same way he told his father, fast, straight, no embellishment. He had discovered early in life that when something serious happened, the people who needed to hear about it didn't need drama. They needed facts in the right order. Alonzo listened without moving. When Carson finished, Alonzo said, "The man whose arm you hit." "Which arm?" "Right," Carson said. "Forearm, I heard it crack. You hit him hard enough to break it." "I hit him as hard as I could," Carson said. "I wasn't trying to break it. I was trying to make him let go." "He let go," Alonzo said. "He let go," Carson confirmed. Alonzo nodded slowly. He looked at his mother. Three men at the clearing. A second vehicle that arrived after. "How many in the second vehicle?" "I couldn't see clearly," Brooke said. "Two doors opened. Could have been two, could have been three. So minimum 5, possibly 6. He looked at the two men near the door. Something passed between them, not words, just a look, and one of them stepped outside. "The truck that was watching your road," Alonzo said to William. "When my people turned up the highway, it stopped moving." "I saw," William said. He was leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms folded, drinking coffee, watching everything with the same quiet attentiveness he gave to weather patterns and soil readings, patient analytical storing information. "That truck is still out there," Alonzo said. "It's not going anywhere now. But they've got eyes on this property, and eyes mean a phone. Carver knows by now that something went wrong." He paused. "Which means we have a window, and that window is not large." "A window for what?" Carson said. Alonzo looked at him directly. "To find out where they went and make sure they don't get reorganized before we do." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "Who is Carver?" Carson said. It was Brooke who answered. "Raymond Carver," she said. "Not his real name. He's been using it long enough that most people don't know the original one anymore. He runs distribution for a Mexican operation, not the big ones you've heard of, one of the smaller ones that's been expanding north by buying off local infrastructure." She paused. "Local law enforcement, local politics. He's been building a corridor through this county for 2 years, a route north that doesn't touch any road we watch. And your son's chapter," Carson said carefully. "You've been blocking that." "We don't run drugs," Alonzo said flatly. It wasn't defensive, it was just a statement. "We've never run drugs. We don't want Carver's operation here any more than the people in this county do. The difference is we're the only ones willing to say that at volume." "So he grabbed your mother to make you back off," Carson said. "Or to make me make a move he could use against me," Alonzo said. "Grief makes people sloppy. An angry man making sloppy moves with this many people behind him, that's a gift to law enforcement. And Carver has enough of law enforcement in his pocket that a gift like that would land exactly where he needed it to." Carson absorbed this. "He wanted you to react." "He wanted me to react wrong," Alonzo said. "There's a difference." William set his coffee mug down on the counter. "So what's the right reaction?" he said. Alonzo looked at him. The question was so direct and so genuinely interested, not challenging, not suspicious, just wanting to understand the logic that something in Alonzo's expression shifted slightly. He wasn't used to being asked that question by someone sitting in their own kitchen, looking at him like he was a neighbor, explaining a property dispute. The right reaction, Alonzo said, is to find out exactly what Carver is running, where he's running it, and who in this county is helping him do it, and then to put that information in front of people who don't work for him. Federal, Williams said. Federal, Alonzo confirmed. You'd work with federal agents, Carson said. We'd hand them something they can't ignore and walk away, Alonzo said. That's different from working with them, he paused. But first we have to find it. And we have maybe 4 hours before Carver decides that waiting is more dangerous than acting. That was the moment one of the men near the back door came back inside. He crossed to Alonzo and bent down and said something in a voice too low for Carson to hear. Whatever it was, it changed the temperature in the room. Alonzo sat back. His jaw worked once. How many? The man held up 3 fingers. How long ago? The man said something. Alonzo looked at his mother. They didn't just have a watch vehicle on the road, he said. They had a second team, moving through your north field right now. He looked at Carson. How big is your north field? About 90 acres, Carson said. He was already standing. There's a drainage channel on the far edge. If they're coming through there, they'll hit the barn before the house. How far is the barn from here? 200 yards. Alonzo stood. He was taller standing than Carson had realized. He looked at the 2 men and gave a direction with his chin. Both men went out the back door without a sound. Alonzo looked at Carson. Stay in the house, he said. That's my barn, Carson said. Alonzo looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he said, stay close and stay behind me. They went out. What happened in the next 8 minutes in the darkness between the Ward farmhouse and the north barn was not something Carson would ever describe in full detail to anyone. Not because it was more violent than it was, but because it moved so fast and with such efficiency that his memory of it came back in pieces rather than sequence. He remembered the cold air. He remembered Alonzo moving through the dark ahead of him with no flashlight and no hesitation, the way a man moves through a space he has already mapped in his head. He remembered voices from the direction of the barn. 2 men, maybe 3, not being careful enough because they'd expected to find a sleeping farmhouse, not what they found instead. He remembered sound and motion and then silence. He remembered one of the men from Carver's team sitting on the ground with his back against the barn wall and his hands behind his head, and Alonzo crouching in front of him with a phone's flashlight in his face, asking one question in a very quiet voice. Where is Carver's operation staged? The man said nothing. Alonzo asked again. Still nothing. Then Brooke Mendoza walked out of the dark. Carson had not known she'd followed them. And from the expression on Alonzo's face, neither had he. And she stood over the man on the ground, and she looked at him for a moment, and she said in a voice that was perfectly conversational, Raymond is going to burn everything he has to save himself. You know that. You've always known that. The question is whether you're going to be part of what he burns. The man on the ground looked up at her. I know your face, she said. I've seen you twice before, at the Hennessy warehouse and at the county fair last August, which means you've been operating in this county for at least 8 months, which means a federal conspiracy charge adds 4 years minimum, and that's before they start counting what was in those vehicles tonight. She paused. Or you tell us where the operation is staged, and we walk away from this conversation, and you were never here. The man on the ground looked at Alonzo. Alonzo said nothing. His face said nothing. The man looked back at Brooke. The old limestone quarry, he said, off Route 9, past the second water tower. Brooke straightened up. She looked at her son. I know where that is, she said. So do I, Alonzo said. He looked at Carson. You know that quarry? Everyone in the county knows it, Carson said. It's been abandoned since I was a kid. There's a chain on the access road, but the chain's old. How wide is the access road? Carson understood what he was being asked. Mahasham. Wide enough, he said. Alonzo stood. He looked down at the man against the barn wall, and then at one of his people. Another look, no words. The man on the ground was not going to be harmed. Carson understood that. He was going to be held somewhere that wasn't here until this was over. They walked back to the farmhouse. The pre-dawn air had gotten colder, and Carson could feel the lack of sleep starting to sit on him, that particular weight that lands on you around 2 in the morning when you've been running on adrenaline and the adrenaline is starting to thin out. He pushed it away. He pushed it away the way he pushed through the last hour of a long harvest day, not by pretending it wasn't there, but by deciding it didn't matter yet. Inside, Alonzo sat back down at the table and made a phone call. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at the room and said, "We move at 4." "That's less than 2 hours," William said. "That's exactly enough time," Alonzo said. "Carver's people in that quarry don't know what happened tonight yet. The ones we caught in the field can't communicate. The watch vehicle on your road isn't going to report in because they can't get past our people on the highway." He paused. "Right now, Carver thinks his operation is intact and his teams are just running a little slow. That window closes at first light. And you're going in with 300 people," William said. It wasn't a question. He'd clearly been listening to the radio communications going on outside. 312, Alonzo said. He looked at Carson. "You said you know the quarry." "I know the access road," Carson said, "and the upper ridge. There's a back way up, not a road, just a trail. Deer path, really, but it runs along the east rim of the quarry, and you can see straight down into the main basin from up there. Can you get to it in the dark?" "I've been up there 100 times, Carson said. Alonzo studied him. "I'm not asking you to go in," he said. "I'm asking if you can get eyes on the basin from the rim before we move so we know what we're moving on. How many vehicles? How many people? Where they're positioned?" Carson looked at his father. William Moore did not tell his son what to do. He had not done that since Carson was 12 years old. He looked at his son and waited. "I can do that," Carson said. "You'd be going with 2 of my people," Alonzo said. "They'll get you there. You tell them what's where. They report back. Then you wait on that ridge until it's over." "And if something goes wrong before you get there," Carson said. "Nothing will go wrong," Alonzo said. He said it not like a man who was being overconfident, but like a man stating an engineering fact. "We've done this before." Carson believed him. He wasn't entirely sure why he had no framework for evaluating that kind of claim, no experience with operations of this kind, but there was something in Alonzo Mendoza's voice that did not leave room for doubt, not because he was performing certainty, but because he had earned it, and the difference between those two things was something Carson's father had taught him to recognize. "All right," Carson said. Brooke had been quiet for several minutes. Now she spoke. "Alonzo," she said. "Sheriff Miller." The name landed differently than any name that had come before it in the conversation. Both of the men near the door shifted. Alonzo's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "What about him?" Carson said. Brooke looked at him steadily. "The man who runs your county's law enforcement," she said, "has been taking money from Raymond Carver for 14 months. The kitchen was very quiet. "You know that for certain," William said. "We have documentation," Brooke said. "Bank records and photographs collected over 6 months. We were waiting for the right moment to use them." She paused. "The right moment is now." "Which is why you didn't want to call local police," Carson said. He was working through it. "Because Miller would know within the hour." "Within 20 minutes, she said. "Does he know about tonight?" Carson said. "Does he know they took you?" Brooke and Alonzo exchanged a look. "We assume he was informed," Alonzo said. "Whether Carver told him the full plan that we don't know. But Miller will know by morning that something went sideways with one of Carver's operations in his county, and his first instinct will be to contain it, not investigate it. So we have to move before he has anything to contain," William said. "Which is why 4 o'clock, Alonzo said. Carson stood up and went to the window. The highway was still lined with bikes. The sky was still dark, but it had changed, not lighter exactly, but different. The way the dark changes in the hour before it starts to lose to the morning. He had lived on this land his whole life, and he knew that change, knew how much time it represented. "I need to show your people something," he said, turning back to the table. "Before we go, about the quarry access." He went to the drawer next to the sink where his father kept miscellaneous papers and pulled out a county land survey map, creased and coffee-stained, and several years old, the kind of map that had been consulted so many times it had stopped lying flat. He spread it on the table and found the quarry with his finger. "Access road is here," he said. "Single lane comes in from Route 9. There's a chain, but like I said, it's old. Chain goes down, this road opens to the main basin." He traced with his finger. But the basin itself is bowl-shaped steep walls on 3 sides, the access road on the 4th. If vehicles are parked in the basin, the only way in or out by vehicle is this road. Alonzo was looking at the map. His focus had shifted completely. He was no longer the son at the table. the man who had knelt in the driveway. He was something else now, something entirely operational, reading the terrain the way Carson read a field before planting. "And the deer path to the east rim," he said. Carson pointed. "Starts here off the old county service road, goes up about a quarter mile. The rim is maybe 40 feet above the basin floor. If we seal the access road first," Alonzo said, not to Carson, but thinking aloud, "then bring the second group over the rim." "They have nowhere to go," one of the men near the door said. First words he'd spoken. "Nowhere to go and nowhere to see us coming from," Alonzo said. "The access road approach from the south will draw their attention. The rim approach from the east comes out of their blind side." He looked at Carson. "You said you can get 2 of my people up that deer path in the dark." "Yes," Carson said. "How long?" 20 minutes up, 15 if we move fast." Alonzo looked at the clock. 3:12. He looked back at the map. He looked at Carson with an expression that was not quite measuring and not quite grateful, something between the two. "You know what I keep thinking," Alonzo said. Carson waited. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you'd kept driving," Alonzo said. "What the next 24 hours look like if you'd kept driving. Where my mother is right now. Where I am right now. What I've done in the last hour that I could never undo." He paused. "I keep thinking about all of that." "I couldn't keep driving," Carson said simply. "I know," Alonzo said. "That's what I keep thinking about." William Ward pushed himself off the kitchen counter and picked up his coffee mug and looked at it and put it in the sink. He turned around and looked at the room, the bikers, the map, his son, the woman with the torn blouse and one shoe, and he said, "Carson, go change your boots. Put on the heavy ones." He looked at Alonzo. "He's going to need both hands free. Whatever gear your people are carrying, make sure it doesn't slow him down on that trail." Alonzo nodded. "Agreed." William looked at his son one more time. That look, the one Carson knew without needing to decode, said, "I trust you. I know who you are. Come home." All of that in one look, the way only a father who has raised a son alone for 8 years can compress it. Carson went to change his boots. In the kitchen behind him, he heard his father offer Alonzo more coffee. He heard Alonzo accept. He heard Brooke Mendoza say something quiet to her son in a voice that had lost all of its operational edge and was just a mother's voice, now low and fierce and loving. He couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. He laced his boots in the hallway and checked his flashlight and thought about the quarry, the smell of it in summer limestone dust and creek water, the way the basin held heat into the evening. He'd gone up there as a kid, he and 2 other farm boys from the county, throwing rocks off the rim and watching them disappear. He knew every route on that deer path. He knew where the path narrowed and where it widened and where the loose shale started near the top. He also knew that what was waiting in that basin now was nothing like summer and throwing rocks. He stood up and went back to the kitchen. 2 men he hadn't seen before were standing at the back door. Alonzo's people, the ones who would go with him to the rim. They were compact and quiet, and their eyes had the same kind of readiness in them that Carson had seen in Alonzo's. They looked at Carson the way professionals look at the civilian guide they've been handed, assessing, not dismissive. "You know the trail," one of them said. "I know every inch of it," Carson said. The man nodded. That was enough. Alonzo stood from the table. He looked at his mother, then at William, then at Carson. "We move in 20 minutes, he said. "The main group stages at the Route 9 turnoff. When I get your signal from the rim." He looked at the man who'd spoken to Carson. "We go." "How will we signal?" Carson said. Alonzo handed him a radio, small black 1 button on the side. "1 press, he said. "That's all. 1 press means you're in position and you can see the basin." "And if something goes wrong before then," Carson said. "Nothing will go wrong," Alonzo said again. Same tone, same certainty. But this time he added, "And if it does, you get yourself off that ridge and back to this farm. Your job tonight is eyes, not anything else." Carson pocketed the radio. Brooke Mendoza stood and crossed to Carson and stood in front of him. She was not a tall woman, but she had a quality of presence that made height irrelevant. She looked at him steadily, the way she'd looked at the man against the barn wall, with complete clear-eyed assessment. Then she put her hand on his arm briefly, just for a moment, and said, "Be careful." "Yes, ma'am," Carson said. "When this is over," she said, "you and I are going to have a longer conversation." "Yes, ma'am," he said again. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close. Carson Ward walked out the back door of his family farmhouse into the pre-dawn Iowa dark, two of Alonzo Mendoza's people behind him, a radio in his pocket, and the deer trail to the east rim of the limestone quarry mapped in his memory like something he'd been given at birth and had been carrying without knowing why. On the highway, 2,000 engines sat silent and waiting. Behind him, his father stood at the kitchen window with cold coffee and steady hands watching his son walk into the dark, the way he'd watched him walk into every difficult thing since the boy was old enough to choose, not without fear, but without interference, because some things a man has to walk into himself. The sky to the east had not changed, not yet, but it was getting ready to. And somewhere on Route 9, past the second water tower, past the old chain on the access road, in the bowl of an abandoned limestone quarry that had once been a place for boys to throw rocks on summer evenings, Raymond Carver's operation was running in the dark, completely unaware of what was coming toward it from three directions simultaneously. Carson found the trailhead without a flashlight. He hadn't needed one. The deer path was exactly as Carson remembered it, narrow-rooted, the kind of trail that punished anyone who moved too fast or too confidently in the dark. He moved at a pace that was quick enough to matter and careful enough not to cost them. The two men behind him matched his rhythm without complaint. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Carson had worked alongside enough quiet, focused men in his life, men who showed up for harvest, men who came when a neighbor's barn needed raising, to know that silence during hard work was not absence. It was concentration. The radio in his pocket felt heavier than it was. He knew the trail by feel more than sight. Left where the big root crossed the path, right where the limestone shelf jutted up and you had to step over it or turn an ankle. Straight through where the brush thickened and most people would assume the trail ended. It didn't. It just got narrow for 20 yards and then opened again. He'd learned this path when he was 14, coming up here with his father to check the county survey markers on the east property boundary. He'd come back alone a dozen times after that for no reason he ever articulated to himself, except that the rim gave him something the flat fields below didn't: perspective. The feeling of being above the thing you were inside of. He thought about that now as he climbed. Being above it, seeing the whole basin at once. One of the men behind him touched his shoulder, a single brief contact, and Carson stopped. They all stood still. Below and to the left, a sound. An engine idling. A vehicle on the access road maybe, or just inside the quarry basin. Carson counted to 10. The sound didn't change, didn't move. Not a patrol. A parked vehicle running its engine, probably for warmth or power. He started moving again. The rim came up on him the way it always did, abrupt after the last hard push through the brush. Suddenly the ground dropped away, and the sky opened, and the whole basin was below him. He went to one knee, instinctively pulling low, and the two men behind him did the same without being told. Carson looked down into the quarry. What he saw turned the air into his chest cold. It wasn't 2 or 3 vehicles. It wasn't a small staging operation, a couple of guys moving boxes in the dark. The quarry basin was organized. There were 6 large trucks, the kind used for commercial freight, not cargo vans or pickups, but full-size rigs backed against the quarry wall in a line. There were generators running. There were lights hooded and directed downward to avoid aerial visibility, but bright enough that from the rim, Carson could see everything clearly. He could see men moving between the trucks with purpose, loading, transferring, stacking. He counted heads, 12 visible, probably more in or around the trucks. And at the far edge of the basin, nose out toward the access road, sat a county sheriff's department vehicle. Not parked like someone who'd driven out to investigate a complaint. Parked like someone who was there on purpose, positioned to watch the access road and give warning if anything came down it. Carson stared at it for a full 5 seconds. Then he pulled the radio from his pocket and pressed the button once. The response came back in seconds. Not a voice, just 2 short clicks. Received, understood, coming. One of the men beside him leaned close and said barely above a breath, "How many are? 12 that I can see," Carson said at the same volume. 6 Freyant trucks, generator power, and a sheriff's unit at the far end watching the access road. The man's jaw tightened. He pulled out his own radio and held it close to his mouth and spoke 3 words in a voice so low Carson couldn't catch them. They settled in to wait. Carson had done a lot of waiting in his life. Waiting for rain, waiting for a newborn calf to decide whether it was going to make it. waiting for his father to come back from the hospital the night he'd had the fall off the baler when Carson was 16 and alone in the farmhouse for 6 hours not knowing. He knew how to wait. He knew how to hold still inside the waiting and not let it eat at him. But this was different from all of those. This was waiting while knowing exactly what was coming, and from the rim of that quarry able to see the 12 men below. Who did not know Carson felt something he hadn't expected to feel. He felt sorry for them. Not for the operation, not for Carver, whoever and wherever Carver was, but for the 12 men down in that basin, working their jobs in the dark, who had no idea that in the next few minutes the entire world around them was going to change with a speed and totality that left no room for options. Some of them were probably in it deep. Some of them were probably just drivers hired on for a run they'd been told not to ask questions about. You couldn't always know which was which from a ridge in the dark. He pushed the thought aside. It wasn't his call to make. He'd made his call back on County Road 7 when he'd turned around for a brush hook instead of driving home. Everything since then had been consequence, and this was part of it. The first thing he heard was nothing. That was the tell. The Iowa night had a texture of sound to it, insects, wind in the corn, the distant low of cattle. All of it had been present since he'd come up the trail. And then over the course of about 45 seconds, all of it stopped. The way sound stops when something large is moving through a space and everything alive in that space goes quiet in response. One of the men beside Carson went very still. Then the ground started talking. Not vibration exactly, or not only vibration. It was a presence, a physical transmission through the limestone beneath them, a deep rhythmic pulse that Carson could feel in his palms where they rested on the rock. He'd felt something like it once before years ago when a line of grain trucks came down the county road in close formation during the co-op harvest. But that had been a fraction of this. That had been a whisper compared to what was building now beneath the soles of his boots. Down in the basin, one of the men stopped walking. He'd felt it too. A second man stopped, looked at the first, said something. The sheriff's unit at the far end of the basin, its brake lights came on. The driver had felt it, was sitting up, paying attention, looking toward the access road. The pulse became a roar. It hit the basin like a wave, not sound exactly, because at that volume and with that many sources, sound ceased to be a thing you heard with your ears and became a thing you felt in your sternum, in your back teeth, in the liquid of your eyes. Every engine in 2,000 motorcycles firing at once at full throttle down the access road and over the Route 9 turn and through the old chain that didn't even slow the first bike down, just snapped and fell and was rolled over before it hit the ground. The lights came on, every headlight, all of them simultaneously flooding the quarry basin from the access road, and 4 columns wide, motorcycle after motorcycle pouring through the gap in the quarry wall in a formation that was so disciplined, so precisely spaced, that it looked less like a raid and more like a military exercise, because that is in fact what it was. These were men who had ridden together for years, who moved in formation, the way a military unit moves, who had done this kind of operation before. Not here, not at this scale, but in principle. And the principle was exactly right. Seal the exit first, flood the space, leave no angle unconsidered. In the basin below, Carson watched the 12 men freeze. It was the freeze of people whose brain has received information it doesn't have a category for. You could see it even from the ridge, the sudden stillness, the turning toward the lights, the moment of absolute incomprehension before the reality assembled itself. And by the time the reality had assembled itself, there was nothing to do with it. The access road was sealed. The walls of the quarry were on 3 sides. And coming over the east rim from behind the men and the trucks and the generator lights were the 2 men who'd climbed up with Carson. They were not alone. 12 more had come up the trail behind them. Carson hadn't heard them coming, hadn't known they were there until they were beside him on the rim, and then moving over it and down into the basin. And he understood in that moment that Alonzo Mendoza had sent people up the back trail, not just for eyes, but for exactly this, the second angle, the blind side, the complete encirclement. One of the men in the basin broke for the quarry wall. He made it about 15 feet. He stopped because there was nowhere left to go, and because the man standing at the base of the quarry wall was looking at him with an expression that communicated with complete economy that this was not a situation in which running was one of the available choices. The man sat down in the dirt. The others followed his example one by one, not because anyone told them to specifically, but because the geometry of the situation made it the only logical conclusion. 12 men surrounded on four sides, light in their eyes, the sound still ringing off the quarry walls. The math was clear to anyone who could still do math. The sheriff's unit, Carson had been watching it the whole time. The brake lights had come on when the sound hit, and then the headlights, and he'd thought for a moment the driver was going to try to run the access road, plow through the motorcycles, get out, get clear. But the motorcycles had sealed the road before the car could build enough speed, and now the unit sat at the far end of the basin with its engine running and its lights on, and nothing to do with either. Alonzo rode in last. That detail Carson noticed it later, turning it over. Every other rider had been ahead of him. He'd come in at the end, not first, not in the position of maximum drama or visibility. He rode to the center of the basin and stopped and got off his bike and stood with his hands at his sides and looked around the space slowly, the way you look at something you have measured in your mind and are now measuring with your eyes to check the accuracy. One of his people brought someone forward, a man in his 50s, thick-necked, wearing a coat that was too light for the temperature. He looked like a man who gave orders and had not been on the receiving end of them in a long time. Carson had never seen Raymond Carver before. He looked at him from the rim and understood instinctively from the way the other men in the basin oriented slightly away from him. Even in custody, not toward him for direction, but away from him, the way you angle away from a thing that has been the source of pressure for a long time, that this was the man. Alonzo looked at him for a long moment, then he walked to the sheriff's unit. He knocked on the driver's window with two knuckles. The knock of someone who knows the door is going to open. It opened. Carson couldn't hear what was said. He was 40 feet up on the rim, and the basin acoustics were complicated by the engines and the echoes. But he could see it, the sheriff's deputy or detective or whoever was in that uniform stepping out with his hands already up. Not because anyone had drawn a weapon on him, but because the gesture of the hands was instinctive, a man trying to communicate surrender before anything else happened. And then the door swung fully open, and Carson saw who it was, and even from 40 feet up and in the dark, he recognized the profile. He'd seen that profile at the county fair for as long as he could remember. He'd seen it at the grain co-op meetings his father attended. He'd seen it on campaign signs along every road in the county for the last two election cycles. Sheriff Dale Miller, not a deputy, not a plainclothes investigator with some degree of plausible explanation. The sheriff himself in uniform in his own vehicle parked inside a cartel staging operation at 3:40 in the morning. Carson sat back on his heels. One of the men who'd come up the trail with him, the one who'd been crouching silently to his right through all of this, let out a single slow breath. "There it is," he said quietly to no one in particular. "Yeah," Carson said. Down in the basin, Alonzo was talking to Sheriff Miller. The conversation was short. Miller's hands stayed up for most of it. At one point, he said something, and Alonzo stopped and looked at him and said something back. And whatever it was, Miller stopped talking, and his hands went a little higher. Then Alonzo stepped back and made a phone call. Carson watched him dial, wait, speak. The call lasted less than a minute. When Alonzo hung up, he looked up toward the rim directly at the spot where Carson was kneeling, as if he'd known exactly where to look the whole time. He gave a single nod. Carson nodded back. He didn't know if Alonzo could see the gesture from that distance. He made it anyway. The climb back down the deer path was faster than the climb up had been. Though Carson's legs had started to register the night properly, the hours of running, the tension held in muscle, the cold that had gotten into his joints while he'd been kneeling on the limestone rim. He moved carefully anyway. This was not the moment to turn an ankle in the dark. By the time he reached the bottom of the trail and got back to the Ward property, the sky had started doing what he'd known it would do, eventually shifting from black to a deep gray blue at the eastern edge, the first suggestion of morning coming up behind the horizon line, like a thought you can't quite put words to yet. His father was at the back door. William Ward looked at his son coming across the field, checked him head to toe, the way a father checks a returning child regardless of age, and then stepped back to let him in. "All right," William said. "All right," Carson said. They went inside. Brooke was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd found somewhere in their cabinets. She looked at Carson when he came in, and he knew she had been reading his face before he'd even gotten through the door. She was very good at that, reading a face from across a room, extracting the information she needed before a word was spoken. "He's there," Carson said. "Miller, in his own unit, parked inside the operation." Brooke closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, they were clear and decided. Alonzo made a call, she said. It wasn't a question. I saw him make it, Carson said. Federal, she said. There's a field office in Des Moines. There's a specific agent we've been building toward a conversation with him for 4 months. Tonight, force the timeline. She paused. It's all right, the documentation was ready. You had all of this ready, William said. Not an accusation, just recognition. We've been watching Carver for a long time, she said. We knew what he was building. We didn't know when he'd move on me, but we had a contingency. She looked at Carson. The contingency did not include a 19-year-old farm boy. That part we didn't plan. How long until federal agents get to the quarry, Carson said. They may already be moving, she said. Alonzo would have given them what they need. The location, the physical evidence in those trucks, the sheriff in uniform on site. That's not a case you build. That's a case that builds itself. William sat down at the table. He hadn't sat down since midnight, Carson realized. He pulled out the chair across from Brooke and sat like a man whose body had finally sent an invoice for the night's labor. What happens to Carver? Carson said. Brooke looked at her teacup for a moment. Raymond is a practical man, she said. He's been practical his entire career. He didn't get as far as he did by being stupid or sentimental. She paused. He will understand what tonight means. He'll understand that the operation is gone, that Miller is gone, that the corridor he spent 2 years building is gone. And he'll make a calculation. She looked up. Practical men in impossible positions make the same calculation every time. They look for what they can trade. He'll deal, Carson said. He'll deal, she said, which in some ways is better than a trial. Trials take years. A deal means names, roots, connections, information that reaches further than Raymond Carver's operation in central Iowa. She picked up her teacup. The people Raymond works for won't be happy with him, but that's no longer our concern. Carson thought about the 12 men in the basin, the drivers who might have just been drivers. He thought about the man against the barn wall who'd given up the quarry location because Brooke had laid out his future with such clinical precision that there was nothing left to argue with. The men who were at the quarry, he said, the ones who aren't Carver and aren't Miller. What happens to them? Brooke looked at him steadily. That depends on what they know and what they're willing to say about it, she said. Some of them will trade what they have. Some of them won't have anything worth trading. Some of them were just hired hands. She paused. That's not a clean answer. No, Carson said, but it's an honest one. She nodded once with something that looked like respect. The three of them sat in the kitchen as the sky outside continued its slow argument with the dark, and the coffee went cold and the clock moved past 4:30, and down on the highway, the last of the bike engines idled down to silence as the formation began slowly and in perfect order to disperse. Carson didn't hear Alonzo's bike pull up the driveway. He heard the back door open, which meant his father had left it unlocked, which meant his father had been expecting him. Alonzo came into the kitchen and stood for a moment, and there was something different about him now. Not looser exactly, but resolved. The calculation was over. The outcome was in. He looked at his mother first, and she looked at him, and between them passed a conversation that had nothing to do with Carver or Miller or the quarry. Then he looked at Carson. Federal agents are on site, he said. They were 40 minutes out when I called. They have everything they need, the trucks, the product, the manifests, Miller in uniform, Carver on location. He paused. It's done. William Ward said, coffee? Alonzo looked at him. Yeah, he said, please. William got up to make a fresh pot. Alonzo sat down. He looked at Carson across the table the way a man looks at someone. He is still working out how to account for not what category to put them in, but how to hold the full weight of what they've done without diminishing it by reducing it to a simple transaction. I called the federal contact from inside the quarry, he said, while our people were securing the site. I told them we had physical evidence of a large-scale cartel staging operation and on-site law enforcement participant and documentation of 14 months of payments. He paused. I also told them that the tip came from a civilian, a farmer in this county who stumbled onto an abduction in progress and chose to act. He paused again. I did not give them your name. I didn't ask you to keep it out, Carson said. I know, Alonzo said. I kept it out because you don't need federal agents showing up here. They asking you to formalize a story that doesn't need formalizing. What you did tonight doesn't need a deposition. It needs to be left alone to be what it was. Carson looked at him. What was it? Alonzo was quiet for a moment. Outside, the last of the bikes were pulling away from the highway, the sound of them fading south and north and east, until the Iowa road went quiet again, the way it had been before midnight, before the shoe in the back of a car and a farm boy who couldn't keep driving. You know that story that Alonzo said about the man who sees something wrong and crosses the street to fix it? Everyone has a version of it they like to tell, about the kind of person who does that, what they're made of. He looked at Carson. Most people who tell that story have never actually been the person in it. They think they know what it means. They don't. You do. Carson didn't say anything. What you did tonight, Alonzo continued, set something in motion that we needed set in motion. You didn't just save my mother. You handed us the moment we'd been waiting for, the right moment, with the right conditions, with Carver exposed and Miller exposed, and the whole operation sitting in a limestone quarry, 40 feet below a deer path that a 19-year-old farmer knew by heart. He shook his head slowly. If you'd kept driving, we'd have spent the next year trying to manufacture those conditions artificially. Maybe we'd have gotten there. Maybe we wouldn't. William came back with the coffee and set a mug in front of Alonzo and one in front of his son and sat back down. What happens next? William said. Alonzo wrapped both hands around the mug. For Carver, federal process, it'll take time. For Miller, same. The documentation my mother mentioned goes to the federal investigators this morning. By tomorrow, every deputy in this county who was loyal to Miller because he was Miller is going to be figuring out who they're actually loyal to. He paused. That's going to be messy for a while, but it'll clean up. And for us, William said. The question was direct without being demanding. Alonzo looked at him. For you, he said, things are going to remain to be quiet. We'll make sure of that. I'm not worried about quiet, William said. I'm asking about my son. Alonzo met his eyes. Your son is under our protection for as long as he lives, he said. That is not a figure of speech. That is not a gesture of gratitude. That is a commitment made by me on behalf of every person who rode down that highway tonight, and there is not a person in that number who would dishonor it. He paused. Carson will never be in a situation where he needs us and we don't come. That is the end of that conversation. William Ward looked at Alonzo Mendoza for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee and drank. Brooke had been quiet through all of this. Now she looked at Carson and said, I want to ask you something. All right, Carson said. When you went back to your truck for the brush hook, she said, in those 2 minutes, you could have driven away. You could have gotten signal down the road and called 911 and been done with it. I know, Carson said. Why didn't you? Carson thought about it seriously the way he always thought about honest questions. He didn't reach for an easy answer or a good-sounding one. He went looking for the true one the way his father had taught him to do. Because calling 911 is what you do when the situation might work out fine without you, he said. When I looked at that cargo area, the rope and the plastic sheeting, I understood that this was not a situation that was going to work out fine without someone doing something. And I was the someone who was there. He paused. I didn't think past that. Brooke Mendoza looked at him for a long time. No, she said quietly. You didn't, and that's exactly what made it work. The sky outside had gone from gray-blue to the first pale suggestion of actual light. Carson could hear birds beginning tentatively, the way birds start in early morning. One voice, then a pause, then another, as if they're checking whether it's really time yet. The farm was waking up around them the way it always did on schedule, indifferent to what the night had held. Carson thought about the cows. They needed to be fed at 6. The south irrigation line had a fitting he'd noticed was running slightly loose yesterday, which needed to be addressed before it became a problem. The hay in the east barn needed turning. He thought about these things not to escape from what had happened, but because they were real and they were his, and they were still there unchanged, waiting for him the way work always waited on a farm, patiently without judgment, with the quiet certainty that it would need doing regardless of what else had occurred. He was going to be very tired by noon. He looked at Alonzo. What about the people who were watching this farm, the ones you secured tonight in the field and on the road? They'll be turned over, Alonzo said, along with everything else. My people are making sure the handoff is clean. He paused. There won't be questions about how they were found or where they were held. That's already been managed. You've done this before, William said. Not approvingly or disapprovingly, just observing. Parts of it, Alonzo said. Not all of it. Not like tonight. What was different about tonight, Carson said. Alonzo looked at him. He almost said something. Then he looked at his mother, then back at Carson. Tonight started with someone doing something for free, he said. No angle, no calculation, no asking what's in it for them. That's a rarer thing than people think. Most of what my world runs in is transaction, this for that loyalty, bought and maintained debt and repayment. I understand that world. I've lived in it my whole life. He paused. Tonight, a 19-year-old kid in Iowa stopped his truck on a dark road because he saw a woman's shoe and understood what it meant. And then everything else was downstream of that. He shook his head. You can't plan for that. You can't build toward it. It just happens or it doesn't. The kitchen was quiet. Brooke stood up from the table. She was steadier on her feet now than she'd been 3 hours ago, though the marks of the night were still on her, the lip, the eye, the torn blouse, the single shoe she had not replaced because there was no replacing it here. She looked like a woman who had been through something serious and had not been diminished by it. She looked at William Ward. Thank you for your home, she said, for the cloth and the water and the coffee and the open door. My mother would have done the same, William said. She smiled at that, a real one, brief but genuine. Then she looked at Carson one last time. We'll be in touch, she said. It was not a threat, and it was not entirely a comfort. It was simply true the way certain things are simply true, and you know it when you hear it because it has the weight of something that has already been decided. Carson nodded. Alonzo finished his coffee and stood. He looked at Carson, and there was something in that final look that Carson would carry forward. Not the scene of it, not the drama of the night, but this moment specifically. Two men at a kitchen table in the early morning, each of them understanding something about the other that had no name and didn't need one. Alonzo extended his hand. Carson shook it. We'll be in touch, Alonzo said, echoing his mother without meaning to, or maybe meaning to. They went out the back door. Carson and his father stood in the kitchen and listened to the bike start and move down the driveway and turn onto the road and fade. The sky was light now. Not full morning, but committed to it, the kind of light that doesn't go back. William Ward looked at his son. You need sleep, he said. I need to feed the cows, Carson said. William looked at him for a moment. Then he put on his boots. I'll do the cows, he said. You get 2 hours. Carson started to argue. His father gave him a look that closed the argument before it opened. Carson went upstairs. He lay down on his bed without taking off his boots and stared at the ceiling and listened to his father moving around below him, heard the back door, heard the familiar rhythm of the morning farm starting up around him like something breathing. He thought about the woman's shoe in the back of the car. He thought about Alonzo kneeling in the driveway. He thought about 2,000 headlights on a rural Iowa highway at 1 in the morning. He thought I almost kept driving. And then for the first time in about 19 hours, Carson Ward closed his eyes. Carson slept for 90 minutes. Not 2 hours, 90 minutes, because at 6:50, his body simply stopped being able to stay down the way it had never been able to stay down past a certain point on a working farm, regardless of what the night had held. He came downstairs in clean clothes, and his father had already done the cows and was standing at the kitchen counter eating a piece of bread over the sink, the way he always ate when he didn't want to bother with a plate. William looked at him. Coffee's fresh, he said. Thanks, Carson said. They didn't talk about the night for a while. That was his own kind of conversation. The silence of two people who have been through something together and are giving it room to settle before they put words on it. Carson drank his coffee and looked out the window at a morning that looked exactly like every other morning on this farm, the light coming in flat and clean across the fields, the shadows of the tree line long and familiar. His phone had signal again. He hadn't noticed when it had come back. He had 14 missed calls. 3 of them were from a number he didn't recognize. 6 were from his cousin Danny in Ames, who was probably calling because something was on the news. 4 were from his friend Mike Heller, same reason. 1 was from a woman at the county extension office who had no idea what she'd accidentally called into the aftermath of. Carson turned the phone face down on the table. It's on the news, William said. It wasn't a question. I'd guess so, Carson said. How much? I don't know yet. Carson picked up the coffee again. Quarry raid with federal agents. Sheriff arrested on site. That's going to make noise. It'll make noise for a while, William said. Yeah. William finished his bread and brushed the crumbs into the sink and turned around and leaned against the counter. He had a look on his face that Carson recognized the look he got when he was working up to saying something he'd been turning over for a while. You did right, William said. Last night. All of it. I know, Carson said. I'm not saying you need to hear it, William said. I'm saying it because it's true and because I want it said out loud at least once before the world starts putting its own words on what happened. Carson looked at his father. What do you think the world's going to say? Depends on which part of the world, William said. The part that reads newspapers is going to say a lot of things, most of them missing the point. The part that lives in this county is going to say a lot of other things, some of them accurate. He paused. The part that matters already knows what happened. The phone buzzed face down on the table. They both looked at it. Neither of them moved. It stopped. The farm, Carson said. The mortgage. William's expression shifted slightly. Not discomfort exactly, but the look of a man who has been carrying a weight and had briefly set it down and been reminded it was still there. What about it? How much time do we have? Carson said. That's not your concern, William said. The automatic answer, the parental deflection. He'd been giving it for 2 years, ever since the bad harvest season, and the equipment loan that hadn't worked out the way it was supposed to. It is my concern, Carson said. It's my farm, too. How much time? William looked at his son for a moment. Then he said, the bank sent a letter last week. 90 days. Carson absorbed this. 90 days was real. 90 days was not an abstraction or a someday problem. 90 days was 3 months, which on a farm meant 1 season, which meant they were already inside the last season of the life they'd been living on this land. I've been trying to figure out the refinance, William said. There are options. I've got a call with the loan officer on Thursday. All right, Carson said. It's going to be all right, William said. He said it with the particular kind of conviction that men use when they're not entirely sure something is true, but have committed to behaving as though it is because behaving as though it is has gotten them through every hard thing so far. Carson nodded. He believed his father. He also understood the numbers. Both of those things could be true at the same time. His phone buzzed again. He turned it over. Unknown number, same one as 3 of the missed calls. He almost let it go again. Then he picked it up. Yeah, he said. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Professional, precise, with a cadence that said government before she'd given her title. Is this Carson Ward? It is, he said. Mr. Ward, my name is Special Agent Patricia Holt with the FBI's Des Moines Field Office. I apologize for the early call. I want to assure you this is not. I want to be clear that you are not in any kind of trouble. We're conducting follow-up on the operation at the limestone quarry last night, and we have information suggesting you may have had some proximity to related events earlier in the evening. A pause. I'd like to speak with you in person at your convenience, not at a field office, wherever you're comfortable. Carson looked at his father, who was watching him. Can I ask who gave you my name? Carson said. A pause from the agent. I'm not able to tell you that right now, she said, but I can tell you that whoever did presented you in entirely positive terms. Carson thought about Alonzo saying he'd kept his name out. He thought about the gap between saying something and circumstances making it untrue. He wasn't angry. He understood. There was a difference between keeping a name out of an informal tip and keeping a name out of a federal investigation that was now processing 6 freight trucks full of cartel product and a county sheriff in handcuffs. I can meet you this morning, Carson said. There's a diner in Millhaven on Route 12. It opens at 7:30. I'll be there at 8, she said. He hung up. FBI, William said. FBI, Carson confirmed. William picked up his coffee mug, found it empty, and set it back down. You want me to come? No, Carson said. Then, yes, actually, yeah, come. William almost smiled. All right, he said, let me get my boots. Special Agent Patricia Holt was already at the diner when they arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall in the way of someone who always sits with their back to the wall. She was in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a jacket, which Carson understood was deliberate. She had a coffee in front of her and a notepad that she closed when they walked in. She stood and shook Carson's hand and then William's and said, "Thank you for coming." And it didn't sound like a pleasantry. It sounded like she meant it specifically. They sat. She looked at Carson with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who was very good at their job and had no interest in pretending otherwise. "I'm going to be straight with you," she said. "What happened last night at the quarry, what we found there, what we're processing right now is significant. I don't mean significant in the way that it gets used routinely. I mean, this is the largest single interdiction in the upper Midwest in 6 years, and it's connected upward to an organization we have been building a case against for 4 years. She paused. "The piece that led us there came from a source who told us a farmer in this county intervened in an abduction attempt and set a chain of events in motion." "That's you." "That's me," Carson said. "I want to hear what happened," she said. "In your words, from the beginning." So Carson told it for the third time. He was getting good at it, the facts in the right order. No embellishment, the full truth without anything that wasn't asked for. He told her about the drive home and the car in the ditch and the shoe. He told her about the 3 men and the brush hook in the cornfield. He told her about the farm and the phone call and Brooke Mendoza. He did not tell her about the radio on the quarry rim or the deer path or the 12 men in the basin. He told her that after Brooke made her call, people arrived, and those people identified the quarry as a staging location, and those people contacted her office. Holt listened without writing anything. She was watching his face rather than his words, the way experienced interviewers do, checking the face against the content, looking for the gap between them. There was no gap. "The source who contacted us," she said carefully. "Alonzo Mendoza." "I wouldn't know who it was," Carson said. "Technically true." She looked at him. "Mr. Ward," she said, and her voice had shifted, not warmer, but more direct. "I've been doing this work for 17 years. I have sat across from a lot of people in a lot of diners and listened to a lot of versions of events. I'm not trying to put you in a position. I'm trying to understand what happened so we can build something from it that holds." She paused. "The Hells Angels delivered 6 Freighter trucks, a county sheriff, and the on-site operational leader of a cartel distribution network to federal jurisdiction in a single night without a single civilian casualty, with documentation that our forensic accountants are telling me is the most comprehensive paper trail they have seen from an informal source in a decade." Another pause. "That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because someone spent a long time getting ready for the right moment. And the right moment happened because a farm boy stopped his truck on a dark road." Carson was quiet. "I'm not asking you to testify against anyone," she said. "I'm not asking you to be a formal witness to anything. I'm asking you to understand that what you set in motion last night is going to matter for a long time in ways you probably can't see from here." She looked at him steadily. "And I'm asking if there's anything you need from us in return." Carson looked at his father. William was sitting with his hands around his coffee mug, watching the agent with the same patient attention he gave to everything, storing information, not reacting. "There's a corrupt sheriff in your custody," Carson said, turning back to Holt. "There is," she said. "How deep does it go in this county?" he said. "Beyond Miller, his people, his deputies, the county commissioners he was connected to. How deep?" Holt was quiet for a moment. "We're still mapping that," she said carefully. "But it goes," Carson said. "It goes," she confirmed. "So this county's law enforcement structure is compromised at a level we don't fully know yet," Carson said. "Which means the people in this county, farmers' families, people who've been living under Miller's jurisdiction for years, they've been operating under a system that was partially working against them." "Yes," Holt said. "That's accurate." "Then what I need," Carson said, "is for the cleanup here to be as honest as the raid last night. I need the people in this county to end up with a law enforcement system that actually works for them. That's what I need." Holt looked at him for a long moment. Across the diner, the cook was running something on the flat top, and the smell of it was ordinary and good and completely indifferent to everything being discussed in the corner booth. "I can promise you that the federal investigation will go where the evidence goes," she said. "I can't promise you what that looks like on the other end, but I can tell you that Miller's cooperation, which we're actively negotiating, will be contingent on full disclosure of the network within this county. Every name, every payment, every arrangement." She paused. "That's the leverage, and we'll use it." "All right," Carson said. He picked up his coffee. "Then that's what I need." She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her own coffee. "How old are you?" she said. 19, he said. She shook her head slowly, not dismissively, just with the slight incredulity of someone who has just confirmed something they had been told, but hadn't quite believed until now. 19, she said. They talked for another 40 minutes. Holt asked careful, specific questions about the timeline of the evening, when he'd stopped, what he'd seen, how long between actions, and Carson answered all of them with the same precision he'd brought to the whole telling. William spoke twice, once to confirm the time Brooke had arrived at the farm, and once to add a detail about the watch vehicle at the Henderson intersection that Carson had overlooked. Holt wrote both things down. When they were done, she closed her notepad and slid a card across the table. If you think of anything else, she said, or if anything comes up that concerns you, anyone approaching you, any pressure from any direction, you call me directly. What kind of pressure? Carson said. Carver has people beyond this county, she said. The operation here was one node in a larger network. Most of those nodes don't know yet what happened last night. When they find out, there may be questions about how it happened, how the operation was located. She looked at him evenly. I don't expect anything to come to your door, but I want you to have the number. Carson pocketed the card. Outside the diner in the parking lot, Holt shook both their hands again and walked to a nondescript government vehicle and left without looking back. Carson and William stood by William's truck. She's good, William said. Yeah, Carson said. You believe her about the cleanup? Carson thought about it. I believe she'll do what she said. I believe the investigation will go where the evidence goes. He paused. I believe the county is going to be a different place in a year than it is now. He paused again. Whether different means better, that's going to depend on who fills the space that Miller leaves. William looked at him. When did you start thinking like that? Carson looked at his father. Last night, he said. They drove home. The farm looked exactly the same. That was the thing Carson kept returning to in the days that followed. The farm looked exactly the same. The south irrigation line still had the loose fitting. The hay in the east barn still needed turning. The cows needed feeding at 6 and at 6 and at 6, the same as they had every morning of his life. But the county did not look the same. By noon on the day after the raid, the news had names: Carver Miller, the quarry, the freight trucks, the federal investigation. By evening, the names had faces. By the following morning, every person in the county who had ever done business with the sheriff's department or attended a county commission meeting or put a Miller campaign sign in their yard was running a private inventory of what they had known and when they had known it and what that meant about them. It was a particular kind of disruption. Not violent, not immediately visible, but deep, the way a frost goes into the ground and doesn't show its damage until spring. Carson had 3 conversations in those first days that stayed with him. The first was with Mike Heller, his oldest friend, who drove out to the farm on the second morning and sat at the kitchen table drinking William's coffee and looking at Carson with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual and failing completely. So it was you, Mike said. What was me? Carson said. Don't, Mike said. It's all over the county. Someone at the FBI field office talked, or someone at the quarry talked, or someone who was on that highway at 1 a.m. talked. It doesn't matter. Everyone knows a farmer stopped those guys, and everyone knows it was you. Carson was quiet. Are you okay? Mike said. I'm fine, Carson said. Your dad? Fine. Mike looked around the kitchen at the table and the coffee pot in the window. I drove past the Henderson intersection this morning, and he said, there was a news van. I saw, Carson said. They're going to want to talk to you. They can want, Carson said. Mike nodded. He drank his coffee. He was quiet for a while, and then he said in a completely different voice, quieter, more careful, were you scared? Carson thought about it honestly. Yes, he said, but it didn't matter. Mike looked at him. What do you mean it didn't matter? I mean being scared didn't change what needed doing, Carson said. So it didn't factor. Mike was quiet for another moment. I would have kept driving, he said, not ashamed of it, just honest. You don't know that, Carson said. I do actually, Mike said. I know myself pretty well. I would have called 911 from down the road. That might have been the right call, Carson said. No, Mike said. It wouldn't have been, not with the plastic sheeting in the cargo area. He looked at Carson. You didn't tell me about the plastic sheeting. That detail wasn't in the news. I just know you. Carson looked at his friend. Yeah, he said. That's why I didn't keep driving. The second conversation was with a man Carson didn't know. A deputy named Roy Caswell, who showed up at the farm gate on the third morning in his personal vehicle out of uniform and asked if he could speak to Carson privately. He was in his mid-30s, lean with the look of a man who had been carrying something heavy and had decided today was the day to put it down. Carson walked out to the gate, and they stood on opposite sides of it. "I want you to know," Haswell said without preamble, "that I didn't know about Miller, about any of it." He met Carson's eyes directly. "I've been a deputy in this county for 9 years. I thought I knew who I worked for. I didn't know." Carson looked at him. "Why are you telling me?" he said. "Because you're the reason it came apart," Caswell said. "And I needed you to know that there are people in that department who are glad it came apart, even though it's our careers on the line while it gets sorted out. Even though everything we've done in the last year is being reviewed." He paused. "There are good people in that department. I want you to know that." "I believe you," Carson said. Caswell nodded. He looked like he'd expected more resistance and wasn't sure what to do with the absence of it. "Okay," he said. "That's all I wanted to say." He got back in his personal vehicle and drove away. The third conversation happened on the fourth day, and Carson hadn't expected it, and it was the one that hit him differently from all the others. He was working the south field, finally addressing the irrigation fitting, when his father called from the farmhouse. Not a shout, which was how they communicated field to house when the distance required it, but a call that was quieter than usual, which meant come in now, but not an emergency. Carson came in. There was a woman standing in the kitchen. She was in her 60s, small with gray hair, cut close to her head, and the kind of hands that told you she'd worked with them her whole life. Carson didn't recognize her. She had a casserole dish covered in foil on the table in front of her, and she was standing very straight in the way of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say. "You're Carson?" she said. "I am," he said. "My name is Elaine Marsh," she said. "My husband Harold farmed the county over from your grandfather. We've been in this county for 41 years. She paused. "My granddaughter is 14 years old. Last spring she told me that a man had been approaching her at the school bus stop, said things to her, followed her twice." She paused again, and something moved through her that Carson recognized as controlled fury, the same thing he'd seen in Brooke Mendoza's face. "She told me, and I told the sheriff's department." Carson was very still. "Miller himself took the report," she said. "Told me they'd look into it. That was 8 months ago. Nothing happened. I followed up 3 times. Nothing happened. I stopped following up because I was told very politely that there was no evidence of criminal conduct and that I should encourage my granddaughter to walk a different route." She stopped. "Last week they arrested that man. Because of the investigation, your situation opened up the review of cases that were dropped or closed under Miller's watch. They found the report I filed. They found 2 others like it." Carson didn't speak. "I came here," she said, "because I didn't know where else to go with it. To say thank you felt like too small a thing. But it's the only true thing I have." She put both hands on the casserole dish. "I made a chicken and rice. It feeds 4. I don't know how many of you there are." "2 of us," Carson said. "It'll last then," she said. She left. Carson stood at the kitchen table with his father for a long time after she drove away. Neither of them spoke. The casserole dish sat between them on the table, still warm, smelling of something home-cooked and uncomplicated. Eventually, William said, "You all right?" "No," Carson said. He said it plainly without drama because it was the truth, and the truth was that something about Elaine Marsh and her granddaughter, and 8 months of nothing happening, and a different route, something about that had gotten through the operational distance he'd been maintaining since the night on County Road 7 and landed somewhere real inside him. "Good," William said. Carson looked at him. "Good that you're not all right," William said. "It means you understand what it was. Not just what happened to you. The whole shape of it." Carson pulled out a chair and sat down. He put both hands on the table flat and looked at them, the same hands that had swung the brush hook that had pulled Brooke Mendoza to her feet in a muddy clearing that had pressed a radio button on a limestone rim at 4 in the morning. "Miller let that man keep walking past her granddaughter's bus stop," Carson said, "because he was protecting Carver's network, because making trouble in the county, even the right kind of trouble, created noise he didn't want." He paused. "How many others? How many calls like hers did he bury because they were inconvenient?" "Holt said the review is going back 3 years, William said. 3 years, Carson said. "They'll find what they find," William said. "And what they find is going to be they—" Carson stopped. Started again. Dad, what I did on that road, what I found when I stopped. The shoe, the plastic sheeting. Brooke Mendoza, all of it. If I hadn't stopped, she would have been used against her son, and Alonzo would have made a mistake, and Carver would have used that mistake, and Miller would have covered what needed covering, and that woman's granddaughter would still be walking past that man at the bus stop. He paused. That's the whole chain. One shoe in a car in a ditch. Yes, William said simply. That's too much weight for one shoe, Carson said. It's not about the shoe, William said. It's about you stopping. The shoe just told you to stop. The decision was yours. Carson sat with that. Outside, the irrigation system clicked on in the south field. The fitting must have reseated itself somehow, or his repair earlier had held. The sound of it was regular and mechanical and completely ordinary. The sound of his life going on the way it always went on, water moving through pipes ground, receiving it, things growing. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at Ida. Unknown number, he picked it up. Carson, Alonzo's voice. Direct, no preamble. Yeah, Carson said. We need to meet, Alonzo said. Not at the farm. There's a truck stop on I-80 east of Adair. Can you be there in 2 hours? Carson looked at his father. What's happened, he said. A pause. Something you need to hear from me before you hear it from anyone else, Alonzo said. The way he said it told Carson two things simultaneously. The first was that it was serious. The second was that it wasn't bad, or rather it was serious in the way that large things are serious, not in the way that dangerous things are serious. 2 hours, Carson said. He hung up. His father was already looking at him. Truck stop on I-80, Carson said. He has something to tell me. I'll drive, William said. You don't have to. I'll drive, William said. He picked up his keys. They drove east on the interstate with the farm falling away behind them, and the late morning Iowa sky flat and bright above the highway, and Carson sat in the passenger seat of his father's truck and watched the mile markers go by and thought about the chain of things that had led to this particular Tuesday morning, this particular highway, this particular destination, and how all of it, the whole improbable cascade, had started with a man who almost didn't stop. The truck stop was busy with the late morning freight traffic. Carson spotted Alonzo's bike in the far corner of the lot before they'd fully parked. He was sitting at a table inside with a cup of coffee and no one else, which meant the three men who had come in with the formation 3 nights ago were somewhere nearby and not visible, which was exactly how they would operate in a space like this. Carson and William went in. Alonzo stood. He shook both their hands. They sat. He looked at Carson with an expression that was resolved and direct the way a man looks when he has made a decision and is now executing it. I want to tell you what happened with Miller, he said. Holt told me some of it, Carson said. Not this part, Alonzo said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee. Miller wasn't just on Carver's payroll. Miller was specifically assigned to monitor the Ward farm. Carson heard the words. His brain processed them and then asked for them again. What? He said. For the last 4 months, Alonzo said. Carver had intelligence suggesting that my mother was using a series of rural properties in this county as informal communication stops. Not staging locations, just places to pass messages, meet contacts, stay off the usual routes. He paused. That intelligence was wrong. We weren't using this county specifically. But Carver didn't know that, and he had Miller watching a handful of farms that fit the profile. He looked at Carson. Your farm was on the list. The table was very quiet. They were watching us before that night, William said. His voice was completely flat, the particular flatness of a man absorbing something that rearranges things. For about 6 weeks, Alonzo said. Nothing serious, a drive-by now, and then Miller running your plates through the system, checking your loan status. He paused. Your mortgage situation was in their assessment. Carson thought about the letter William had mentioned. 90 days. He thought about what it meant that Miller had known about it, that a corrupt sheriff had been reading their financial vulnerability as part of a cartel's intelligence operation. They were going to use it, Carson said. Not a question. Not directly, Alonzo said. But in Carver's playbook, a farm family in financial difficulty near a county road he needed clear is a useful piece of information. Whether he would have acted on it, I don't know. The operation ended before it got there. He paused. But I wanted you to know, because knowing that means you understand that stopping on that road was not random. You were already in this county's situation whether you knew it or not. You just made a choice that put you on the right side of it. Carson absorbed this. You came out here to tell me that in person, he said. Yes, Alonzo said. Why, Carson said, you could have left that out entirely. Alonzo looked at him. Because you deserve to know the full shape of what you walked into. You made a decision without full information. That's what decisions in the dark are by definition. But now that the light is on, you should see all of it. He paused. There's one other thing. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out an envelope and set it on the table between them. Carson looked at it. He didn't touch it. What is that? William said. Open it, Alonzo said. William picked it up. He opened it with the careful deliberateness of a man who has handled a lot of important documents over a farming life, deeds, loan papers, equipment, titles, the kind of paper that changes what you own and what you owe. He read what was inside. His face went through several things in a short period. He looked up at Alonzo. This is a bank instrument, William said. It is, Alonzo said. This pays off the remaining balance on the Ward Farm mortgage, William said. It does, Alonzo said. The truck stop went on around them, freight, drivers at the counter, a family with kids at a booth near the window. The sounds of ordinary American Tuesday morning in a highway rest stop completely indifferent to what was happening at the corner table. William set the envelope down slowly. He looked at Alonzo with an expression that had several layers in it. Gratitude was the surface. Beneath it was something more complicated, the dignity of a man who had been carrying a weight and did not know how to receive the removal of it, without also receiving the implication that he'd needed it removed. I can't accept this, William said. You can, Alonzo said, and you will. He said it without force, without pressure, just certainty. Your son put himself between 3 armed men and my mother with a brush hook and 36 inches of good sense. He brought her to safety. He stayed with her. He climbed a deer trail in the dark to give us the eyes we needed at 4 a.m. He paused. What that farm represents, what it represents to him, what it meant that he was there that night to stop when another man might not have that farm, stays in the Ward family. That is not negotiable. William Ward looked at the envelope on the table. He looked at his son. Carson met his father's eyes. He thought about 8 years of his father running this farm alone after his mother died. 8 years of getting up at 4 and feeding what needed feeding and planting what needed planting and fixing what needed fixing and raising a son on the revenue of 400 acres in a county where the margins had been getting thinner every year. He thought about the letter. 90 days. He thought about what it would mean to his father to lose this land, not just financially, not just practically, but what it would mean to a man who was the 3rd generation of his family to work this ground. Dad, Carson said. William looked at him. Take it, Carson said quietly. William sat for a long moment. Then he picked up the envelope and put it in his shirt pocket and buttoned the pocket and looked at Alonzo with the directness of a man who pays his debts. Thank you, he said. Thank your son, Alonzo said. A waitress came and refilled their coffee without asking. That was the kind of truck stop. It was the kind where they kept an eye on the cups and didn't make you work for more. Alonzo wrapped both hands around his fresh mug and looked at Carson across the table with an expression that was different from anything Carson had seen from him before. It wasn't operational. It wasn't a leader managing a situation. It was something closer to personal. My mother wants to see you, he said. When you're ready. No rush, no agenda. She has things she wants to say to you that she wasn't able to say that night. I'd be glad to see her, Carson said. She's going back to Chicago tomorrow, Alonzo said, but she'll be in this region again next month. I'll have someone reach out. He paused. She asked me to give you something from her as well. He reached into his vest pocket again and put something on the table. Small, flat, heavy. A coin, gold-colored with an emblem on one side, a death's head above a rocker that read Hell's Angels in text engraved on the other. Carson picked it up and turned it over. The engraving said, blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. He held it in his hand. It was heavier than it looked, the way significant things often are. He thought about what it meant and decided that whatever it meant, it was true, and that being true was enough. Tell her thank you, he said. You can tell her yourself next month, Alonzo said. They finished their coffee. Outside, the freight traffic moved on the interstate with its own indifferent urgency. Carson Ward sat in a truck stop booth in the middle of Iowa and held a gold coin in his hand and thought about County Road 7 and the car in the ditch and the shoe and the choice he'd made in less than 3 seconds that had not felt in the moment like much of a choice at all. It had just felt like stopping, like being the person who was there. Alonzo stood to leave. He shook William's hand first, then Carson's. He held it for a moment longer than a handshake strictly required, not with sentiment, but with weight, the weight of something real between two people who understand each other across a very wide difference. One more thing, Alonzo said. He was still holding Carson's hand. The man whose arm you broke in that clearing. Yeah, Carson said. He gave federal investigators 6 names this morning, Alonzo said. 6 names above his level in the network. He said he did it because a woman in a farmhouse told him the truth about what was going to happen to him, and he'd spent 2 days deciding she was right. He paused. My mother has that effect on people. Carson said, she does. Alonzo let go of his hand and walked out of the truck stop and across the parking lot and got on his bike and started it, and the sound of it was singular now. One engine, not 2,000, but it had the same quality to it, somehow the same weight, like it was carrying the memory of everything that had surrounded it 3 nights ago on a dark Iowa highway. Carson watched him go. His father put a hand on his shoulder briefly, the way he had in the farmhouse kitchen on that first night, and then took it away, and they left money on the table for the coffee and walked out into the bright, unremarkable Tuesday and got in the truck and drove home. The south irrigation line was running clean when they got back. Carson checked the fitting. It had held. He went back to work. The fitting held for 3 days before it started weeping again. Carson was out in the south field on a Thursday morning, 14 days after the night on County Road 7, kneeling in the mud with a wrench in his hand, when he heard his father's voice from the house. Not a call, a shout. The kind his father almost never used. He was on his feet and moving before he'd made a conscious decision to move. William was standing on the back porch with the phone in his hand and an expression on his face that Carson hadn't seen since the night of his mother's accident. Not fear, but the face of a man whose understanding of the current moment has just been significantly revised. It's Holt, William said, holding out the phone. Carson took it. Yeah, he said. Mr. Ward. Holt's voice was different from their diner meeting, still precise, but with something underneath it that Carson identified after a moment as controlled excitement, the voice of a person who has just received information that validates 4 years of work. I wanted to call you before it went public. Raymond Carver entered a formal cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors this morning at 7:45. Carson waited. He gave us everything, Holt said. Routes, contacts, financial infrastructure, names at every level of the network from the county up. He gave us a sitting state legislator who's been facilitating the Northern Corridor. He gave us 2 customs officials in Chicago. He gave us a logistics company in Des Moines that's been moving product inside legitimate freight for 3 years. She paused. This is not a local case anymore, Mr. Ward. This is a federal case that touches 6 states, and it started because you stopped on County Road 7. Carson stood on the back porch in his muddy boots and held his father's phone and listened. Miller gave a separate statement yesterday, Holt continued, consistent with Carver's account on the relevant points. The county commission has already appointed an interim sheriff from outside the department, someone with no prior connection to Miller's administration. Deputy Caswell has been cleared and is being moved up in the interim structure. A pause. I thought you'd want to know about Caswell specifically. I do, Carson said. Thank you. There's one more thing, she said. Her voice shifted again, slightly, something more careful. The 6 names that were given to us by the man whose arm was broken during the abduction, we've confirmed identities on 4 of them. Arrest warrants went out this morning. She paused. One of those 4 names is connected to a trafficking network that has been operating in the upper Midwest for 11 years. We've had pieces of it, but never the connective tissue. Another pause. Elaine Marsh's granddaughter's case, the man who was approaching her at the bus stop, he's connected to that network. Carson closed his eyes. He was arrested this morning, Holt said. Along with 3 others. The case is being transferred to a specialized unit. She paused one more time. I wanted you to have all of it, the full shape of it, as you put it. She remembered that. He hadn't expected that. "Thank you," he said. It was all he said. He meant it as completely as he'd meant anything in his life. "Thank you, Mr. Ward," she said, and hung up. Carson stood on the porch for a long moment. His father was watching him with that patient, contained attention, not pressing, just present. "Carver flipped," Carson said. "Full cooperation. 6 states. The man from the bus stop was arrested this morning." William put both hands in his pockets. He looked out at the south field, at the morning light on the corn, at the particular quality of a working farm in the middle of a summer that was going to be better than the one before it. "Good," William said. Just the one word. But the weight he put on it was the weight of everything the word needed to carry. Carson handed back the phone and went down the porch steps and picked up his wrench from the ground where he'd dropped it and went back to the irrigation fitting, because the fitting still needed fixing, regardless of what Raymond Carver had told federal prosecutors that morning. And the corn didn't care about any of it, and that was, Carson thought, exactly right. That was exactly as it should be. He fixed the fitting in 20 minutes. It held. He didn't tell anyone about the phone call. Not Mike Heller, not Deputy Caswell, when he ran into him at the feed store 2 days later. Not the woman from the county extension office who called back about a grant program for young farmers. He just carried it with him the way you carry things that are finished, not heavily, not constantly, but present, available when you needed to take it out and look at it and remember what it meant. On the morning of the 18th day, a black car came up the Ward driveway. Not a government vehicle, Carson could tell the difference now. This was private, clean, driven by a man in a jacket who got out and stood by the car without approaching the house. A minute later, the back door opened and Brooke Mendoza stepped out. She was wearing different clothes than she'd worn that night. Obviously, it had been 18 days, but she carried herself exactly the same way. Same posture, same quality of total presence. She had both shoes this time. Carson came off the porch to meet her halfway. She looked at him for a moment, the way she'd looked at him in the kitchen reading the face taking the inventory, and then she said, "You look tired." "I've been working," he said. "Good," she said. "That means things are going back to normal." "Something like that," he said. She looked past him at the farm, the fields, the barn, the house his grandfather had built in 1961 that his father had kept standing through 30 years of hard seasons. She looked at it the way a person looks at a place they understand the value of, not its market value, but its actual value, the kind that doesn't appear on any document. "Can we walk?" she said. They walked along the fence line of the east field, the two of them with the driver staying at the car and William staying in the house, both of them understanding, without being told, that this conversation was meant to be between these two people and no one else. Brooke was quiet for the first 100 yards. She had that quality. She never spoke before she was ready, and she was always ready before most people would expect her to be. She was assembling something, choosing her words with the same precision she'd used at the barn wall and in the kitchen and across from her son at the table. "I have been doing this a long time," she said finally. "Living inside this world, not on the outside looking in inside it. I raised my son in it. I buried my husband in it." She paused. "I know what it costs. I know what it asks of people and what it takes from them and what it leaves in place of what it takes." She paused again. "I also know what it protects. My son protects things in this county and a dozen others that would not be protected otherwise. That is a true thing, and I say it without apology." "I believe you," Carson said. "I know you do," she said. "That's one of the things I came to talk about." She stopped walking. They were at the far corner of the east field, the part that abutted the drainage basin where the old fence ran along the low ground. "The night you brought me to your farm. The night my son arrived. In all of that, I watched you. I watched how you handled it. Not just the physical things, the bravery, the brush hook in the dark. I watched how your mind worked, how you asked questions, how you listened to the answers and used them instead of just cataloging them." She looked at him directly. "You are not a careless person." "My father would say I'm occasionally too careful," Carson said. She almost smiled. "Your father is wrong about that specific thing," she said. "Careful is exactly right. Careful is what the situation needed, and careful is what you brought to it." She paused. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." "All right," he said. "What do you want?" she said. "Not from us, not from what happened, just in your life. What do you want your life to look like in 10 years? Carson looked at the East Field. It was a genuine question, and it deserved a genuine answer, so he spent a real moment with it before he spoke. I want this farm, he said. I want to be farming this land the way my father farms it and the way his father farmed it. I want it to be viable, actually viable, not surviving by the skin of its margin every year. I want to do it right. He paused. And I want the county to be what it should have been. Clean law enforcement. People who can file a report and have it mean something. He paused again. That's it. That's the whole list. Brooke nodded slowly. It's a good list, she said. It's not very long, he said. The good lists never are, she said. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and took something out and held it out to him. An envelope, not the bank instrument kind that Alonzo had produced at the truck stop, smaller than that. He took it and opened it. Inside was a card, a business card handwritten rather than printed with a name and a phone number. The name was not one he recognized. That man, Brooks said, runs a cooperative agricultural lending program out of Kansas City. Not a bank, a cooperative, farmer-owned, farmer-governed. He works specifically with multi-generational farms in the Midwest that are carrying debt loads from difficult cycles. She paused. The mortgage situation is resolved. My son told me Alonzo took care of that. But the operational margins, you've been working with the equipment, loans, the co-op pricing situation, those don't go away because the mortgage does. That man can restructure everything on the farm's balance sheet in a way that actually works for a farm your size. She paused. He's expecting your call. There's no obligation and no cost. It's simply a resource. Carson looked at the card. He thought about his father on the phone with the bank loan officer every Thursday. He thought about the numbers on the equipment lease that came due in October. He thought about what viable actually looked like versus surviving by the skin of its margin. Thank you, he said. It's not a gift, she said. It's information. What you do with it is yours. She looked at him. I want to say one more thing. All right, he said. She was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had weight in it. The weight of a person who is about to say something they have not said lightly and have been choosing the right moment for. I have been grateful to people before, she said, many times for many things. It is a feeling I know well. This is not that. She met his eyes with complete directness. What I feel about what you did, it doesn't have a name that I know of. It is not gratitude. Gratitude is what you feel when someone does something kind for you. What you did was not kind, it was right. Those are different categories. She paused. Gratitude is something I can repay, and I repay it, and the debt is settled. What you did cannot be repaid. So instead of repayment, what I am offering is loyalty. Mine specifically, and my son's, and by extension, everyone who answers to him. She paused again. You will never be alone in a situation that we can affect. Not in a year, not in 10 years, not in 40 years. That is not sentiment. It is a structural commitment, and my son has made it formal within our organization. Carson held her gaze. I didn't do it for that, he said. I know, she said. That's exactly why it's being given. They walked back along the fence line. The morning was advancing, and the light was changing the way it does in Iowa when the summer is working properly, that particular clear, pressing brightness that seems to come from all directions at once. Brooke walked beside him without speaking, and it was an easy silence, the kind that only exists between people who have already said the true things and don't need to fill the space around them. At the driveway, her driver had the door open. She stopped before she got in and looked at Carson one last time. Call that man in Kansas City, she said. I will, he said, and Carson. She said his name the way his mother used to say it, the way he remembered his mother saying it, which was the highest compliment his memory could offer. Live the list. She got in the car. The driver closed the door, and they went down the driveway and turned onto the county road and were gone. Carson stood in the driveway for a moment. Then he went inside. His father was at the kitchen table with the county newspaper open in front of him. The front page had a story about the interim sheriff and the restructuring of the department. His father looked up. How is she? William said. Good, Carson said. He set the business card on the table. She gave me a contact, agricultural cooperative lending in Kansas City. She said he can restructure our operational balance sheet. William looked at the card. He picked it up. He read the name. He set it back down. I'll call him Thursday, he said. I thought you had the bank call Thursday, Carson said. I'll cancel the bank call, William said. He went back to his newspaper. Carson poured himself coffee and sat down across from his father and looked at the kitchen that had been just a kitchen 3 weeks ago and was still just a kitchen, fundamentally, because that is what kitchens do. They persist as themselves regardless of what happens in them, because the things that happen in kitchens require them to stay kitchens. And that is one of the truest and most reliable things about the world. He thought about the coin. It was upstairs on his dresser where he'd put it the night he'd brought it home from the truck stop. He'd looked at it every morning since, not obsessively, not ceremonially, just as part of the natural inventory of the space, the way you look at the things that mean something without making a production of the looking. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. He thought about those words a lot. He thought about what loyalty meant to a man like Alonzo Mendoza, not sentiment, not feeling, but behavior. Consistent, reliable behavior over time. The thing you could count on. He thought about what it meant that a man who operated in a world built entirely on transaction had looked at a 19-year-old farm boy's untransactional decision and responded to it with the only currency that actually mattered. He was still thinking about it 2 weeks later when the second thing happened. He'd been expecting something. He hadn't known what hadn't known when, but he'd known in the way you know certain things when you've been paying attention to a situation long enough. There were still pieces moving. Holt had said 6 states. 6 states was not a thing that settled in 3 weeks. He was in the barn on a Saturday afternoon when his phone buzzed, and the name on the screen was one he hadn't seen before, a name he'd been given with the specific instruction that if it ever appeared, he should answer immediately. He answered. Mr. Ward, a man's voice, older, unhurried. My name is Gerald Hatch. I'm a senior investigator with the federal task force managing the Carver Cooperation Agreement. I'm calling because your name has come up in Raymond Carver's testimony in a way that requires your awareness. Carson set down the equipment he'd been holding. What way? He said. Mr. Carver's cooperation has been extensive and we believe genuine, Hatch said. In the course of providing names and operational details, he also provided information about activities that predated the events of 3 weeks ago. A pause. Specifically, he provided documentation of a plan that was in development at the time of his arrest, a contingency plan for the event that his abduction attempt on Brooke Mendoza failed. The barn was very quiet around Carson. That plan, Hatch continued, named your property as a secondary target. The intent, if the abduction failed and if the Mendoza organization became aware of the failure, was to use your farm, specifically its financial vulnerability and its physical isolation, as a pressure point against any investigation. A pause. Essentially, Mr. Ward Raymond Carver had a plan to come after your farm if things went wrong for him. And they went wrong for him. He didn't get a chance to execute it, Carson said. He did not, Hatch said. His arrest was too complete and too fast. But the plan existed and the documentation of it exists, and I am calling you because you have a right to know that it existed and that we are preserving that documentation as part of the federal record. Another pause. I'm also calling because the documentation raises a question. What question? Carson said. The plan involved a specific individual in this county, Hatch said. Not Miller. Miller was already in custody. Someone else. A county official below the sheriff level who had been receiving smaller payments from Carver's network payments that Miller apparently kept off his own ledger, hired by routing them separately. A pause. This individual is not yet under investigation because the documentation we received only surfaced yesterday. I can't name them to you at this stage. What I can tell you is that we are moving on it, and that moving on it may require a period of time, possibly a week, possibly 2, during which this individual is still in their position. Carson absorbed this. You're telling me, he said slowly, that there may still be someone in the county government who was working for Carver's network who is not yet arrested and who knows or may know that their plan to use my farm as leverage was part of Carver's contingency. That is an accurate summary, Hatch said. Does this person know that Carver gave them up? Carson said. We don't believe so, Hatch said. The cooperation agreement has a confidentiality component. What's been public about Carver's cooperation is limited to confirmed arrests. The names still in processing have not been disclosed. A pause. But in our experience, people in this position develop instincts. They know things are moving. They may begin to feel exposed without knowing precisely why. So what do you need from me? Carson said. Nothing, Hatch said. I'm not calling to ask anything of you. I'm calling because Agent Holt said you told her you wanted the full shape of things, and this is part of the shape. A pause. And because I'm going to suggest that for the next 2 weeks, you vary your routines. Don't be predictable about when you leave and when you return. Keep your father informed of where you are. And if anything feels off, anyone you don't recognize, any vehicle that appears more than once on your road, you call me directly. He gave Carson a number. Carson wrote it on his palm because there was no paper in the barn. How concerned should I be? Carson said, not anxiously, practically. Moderately cautious, Hatch said. Not alarmed. This individual's focus, if they're thinking clearly, will be on covering their tracks, not creating new exposure. Coming after a farm family that is now connected to a federal investigation in a protected relationship with the Mendoza organization would be the definition of not thinking clearly. A pause. But I've been doing this a long time, and I know that people who are cornered don't always think clearly. Understood, Carson said. 2 weeks, Hatch said. Possibly less. We move when we have the documentation properly certified. All right, Carson said. He hung up. He stood in the barn for a minute and looked at the number on his palm, and then went to the house and wrote it in the notebook his father kept by the kitchen phone and told his father everything Hatch had told him. William listened the way he always listened, complete stillness, full attention, no interruption. When Carson finished, William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should call Alonzo." Carson looked at his father. "Not because we need protection," William said, "because he should know there's still a piece moving. His mother was the target 3 weeks ago. If there's a loose end in this county's network, he should know it exists." It was such a precise, sensible thought, delivered in such a completely matter-of-fact way, that Carson sat for a moment just appreciating his father. "Yeah," he said, "you were right." He called the number Alonzo had used at the truck stop. It rang twice. "Carson," Alonzo said. "There's one more name," Carson said. Not arrested yet. Could be 10 days to 2 weeks. Federal investigator says vary our routines." He said it in the same compact way he'd told Alonzo about the 3 men in the clearing on the first night, facts in order, no embellishment. A pause, then understood. "I'll have someone on the county road." "You don't need to," Carson started. "I'll have someone on the county road," Alonzo said again. "Not negotiating. I won't be stating. Not asking. 2 weeks. You won't see them. They'll be there." "All right," Carson said. "How are you?" Alonzo said. The question was direct and genuine, no protocol around it. "Working," Carson said. "Good," Alonzo said. Same tone his mother had used, same meaning. "Call me when the arrest comes through." He hung up. The 2 weeks passed the way the first 3 weeks had passed, with the farm going on being a farm, with the work going on being work, with the morning and evening light on the fields going on being exactly what it had always been. Carson varied his routines the way Hatch had suggested, not anxiously but deliberately, and he never saw the person Alonzo had put on the county road, which was exactly as it should be. On a Wednesday morning, 9 days in, his phone buzzed. "Hatch. We made the arrest this morning," he said. "County Commissioner Gerald Foss. 32 months of payments. He's been informed that Carver's documentation was comprehensive and that cooperation is his only constructive path." A pause. "It's done, Mr. Ward." "Thank you," Carson said. He called Alonzo. 3 words, the arrest came. "Good," Alonzo said. And then, "It's done." It was done. That was a Wednesday. On the following Monday, a man in a gray suit drove up the Ward driveway in a vehicle that was not a government vehicle and not a private security vehicle, but something in between, the kind of vehicle that belongs to the kind of organization that exists in the spaces between the categories, you know. Carson met him at the driveway. The man was in his 50s, precise in his movements, carrying a leather satchel that he handled with the care of someone carrying something that matters. He shook Carson's hand with a brief, firm grip and said, "I'm here on behalf of Alonzo Mendoza. He sends his regards and asked me to tell you he would have come himself, but he's in Milwaukee today and didn't want to wait." "All right," Carson said. The man opened the satchel and produced 3 documents and laid them on the hood of his car. "The first," he said, tapping the left document, "is the final confirmation of the mortgage payoff. Recorded with the county 2 days ago. The farm is unencumbered." Carson looked at Hutton. His father's name on the title line, 400 acres. Clear. The second, the man said, tapping the center document, is a letter of introduction from Alonzo Mendoza to Gerald Hatch, the man you've been speaking with at the Federal Task Force. It formally places the Mendoza organization's collected documentation about Carver's network, everything gathered over the 4-year monitoring period, into federal custody as a permanent contribution to the ongoing case. He paused. This is separate from the cooperation agreement. This is supplementary. It closes gaps that Carver's own testimony left open. He's giving them everything, Carson said. He's giving them everything he held back, the man said. What he gave them in real time was the operation and the players. What he's giving them now is the map, the full architecture of how Carver's network connected upward. He paused. Alonzo asked me to tell you that this is a direct consequence of the position you put them, in the strength of the position, the evidence secured at the quarry, the documentation's integrity. It all created a foundation from which a contribution of this kind could be made without compromising the organization's own standing. He paused again. In plain language, you gave him the leverage to do this cleanly. Carson absorbed this. And the third document, the man said, tapping the right one. Carson looked at it. It was shorter than the others, 1-page thick paper with an embossed seal at the top that he didn't recognize as any government seal he'd ever seen. It's a deed, the man said, for an additional 60 acres adjoining your east field. The land has been in private holding for 12 years, in a state situation, no active farming. The estate was resolved as part of the financial restructuring that accompanied the Carver case. He paused. The deed is in your name. Carson Allen Ward, not your father's, yours. Carson stared at it. 60 acres. The land that ran along the east fence line, the land he'd walked with Brooke Mendoza, the low ground by the drainage basin. He knew that land. He'd looked at it his whole life. He'd never thought of it as something he could own because it had simply never been in that category. I can't, he started. It's already recorded, the man said. The deed transferred this morning. He closed the satchel. Alonzo wanted me to give you something in addition to the documents. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small envelope and held it out. Carson opened it. Inside was a note, handwritten in a hand that was large and deliberate and completely legible. It said, the farm that you didn't lose matters. The land you're adding now matters more. Build something that lasts. You've earned the ground to build it on. Below that, a single line, blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. And below that, A.M. Carson held the note. The man in the suit gave him a moment with it. Then he said, there's one last thing. Brooke Mendoza asked me to give you a message personally. All right, Carson said. She said the coin is not decorative, the man said. She said you'd know what that means. Carson thought about the coin on his dresser, the weight of it in his hand at the truck stop, the engraving on the back. He thought about what it meant, that it was not decorative, that it had a function, that it carried weight in Alonzo's world, the way a title carried weight in a courtroom or a handshake sealed a deal between farmers. That there were people spread across a geography he couldn't fully map who would see that coin and understand what it meant and act accordingly. Tell her I understand, he said. The man in the suit nodded, once put the satchel in his car, shook Carson's hand again, and drove away. Carson stood in the driveway with 3 documents under his arm and a handwritten note in his hand and 60 additional acres recorded in his name. And he looked at the farm, all of it, the whole 460-acre scope of it, now from the south irrigation field to the east fence line to the barn to the house his grandfather built. And he felt something that he would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It wasn't relief. Relief was what you felt when something bad didn't happen. It wasn't pride. Pride was what you felt when you'd done something you could take credit for. What he felt was larger than both of those things and quieter, the feeling of a man who has arrived somewhere he didn't know he was traveling toward and who recognizes it when he gets there and who understands that arriving was only possible because of every single decision that came before it, right back to the one made on a dark county road in the middle of the night when the easiest thing in the world would have been to keep driving. He went inside. His father was at the kitchen table with the county agricultural extension report open in front of him, making notes in the margin, the way he always did, the way he had done for 30 years of planning and planting on this ground. He looked up when Carson came in. He looked at the documents under Carson's arm. He looked at his son's face and read what was there the way a father reads a face that has been as familiar to him as his own for 19 years. Sit down, Carson said. William sat forward. Carson laid the 3 documents on the table. He explained each one. He watched his father's face move through things as he listened through the mortgage confirmation, which his face received with a quiet exhalation, the breath of a man releasing something he'd been holding for 2 years. Through the letter of introduction and the documentation contribution, which his face received with understanding and something like respect. And then through the deed for the 60-acre parcel, which his father stared at for a full 15 seconds without speaking. Eastfield, William said finally. Eastfield, Carson confirmed. Low ground, William said. Good for winter wheat. That's what I was thinking, Carson said. William looked up from the deed. He looked at his son. Carson had seen a lot on his father's face in 19 years, the face his father made when the rain didn't come, when the equipment broke at the wrong time, when the price for corn fell below what the season needed it to be. He'd seen the face his father made the night of the hospital, the face that was trying not to know what it was, starting to know. He'd seen the face at the diner with Holt patient and watchful. He'd seen the face at the back door on the morning after the quarry when he'd looked at his son coming across the field and checked him head to toe. He had never seen the face his father had now. It was not a large face, not dramatic, not theatrical, not the face of a man performing an emotion for an audience. It was small and private and completely unguarded, the face of a man who has been handed something he believed was gone and is holding it carefully because he is still learning the weight of having it back. William Ward put his hand flat on the deed. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather broke this ground in 1959. He was 23 years old. He had 40 acres and a tractor he borrowed from his brother. And he said he told me this himself before he died. He said the hardest thing wasn't the work. The hardest thing was trusting that the work was going to mean something, that you'd put everything into a piece of ground and the ground would give it back." Carson was quiet. "He gave it to me," William said. "I kept it. I intended to give it to you." He paused. "I almost couldn't." He paused again. "Now we're sitting here with 460 acres clear in the Ward name." He looked at his son. "And I'm trying to understand how a shoe in the back of a car on County Road 7 is the reason for that." "It's not the shoe," Carson said. "You told me that." "I know what I told you," William said. "It's the decision," Carson said. "The decision to stop." "Your decision," William said. "Made on a road you drove for 30 years, Carson said. "On a farm you kept alive for 30 years. Made by a person you raised for 19 years. He met his father's eyes. "It's not my decision alone." William Ward looked at his son for a long time. Then he picked up the deed and the mortgage confirmation and the letter of introduction, and he stacked them carefully the way he stacked important documents, and he carried them to the cabinet where he kept the farm's papers, the title, the insurance documents, the co-op agreements, all the paper architecture of a working life on a working farm, and he opened the cabinet and he put them inside. He closed the cabinet, he turned around. "Winter wheat," he said. "Eastfield. We'll need to prep the low ground before October." "I know," Carson said. "That fitting in the south field is still running slow," William said. "I'll look at it this afternoon," Carson said. William Ward sat back down at the kitchen table and picked up his extension report and his pencil and went back to the margin notes that needed making, because the work was what it was, and it needed doing. And the season was not going to wait for anyone to finish being moved by things, no matter how moved by them they genuinely were. Carson poured himself coffee and sat across from his father and looked at the kitchen and the window and the fields beyond the window at the east field where 60 new acres were already in his name and already needed work, at the south field where the irrigation fitting was already asking for his attention, at the whole shape of a life that was exactly what he had said he wanted, and exactly what he had almost not been able to have, and exactly what one decision on a dark Iowa road had in the end secured. He thought about a woman's shoe in the back of a car. He thought about what it meant to stop when stopping was hard. He thought about 2,000 engines on a rural highway, and a man kneeling in a driveway, and a note in a handwriting that was large and deliberate and completely legible. He thought about Elaine Marsh and her granddaughter, and a man who had been arrested, and 3 other men arrested with him, and the cases that were now open, and the cases that would come from those cases, and the long downstream consequence of one moment on one road, when one person decided that what was happening in front of him was not something he could drive past. He thought about all of it, Then he drank his coffee and looked at the east field and started thinking about winter wheat. Because that was the truth of it, the whole true shape of the thing, from County Road 7 to the 60-acre deed in the cabinet. It had never been about being extraordinary. It had never been about courage as a performance, or bravery as an identity, or heroism as something you could claim and carry around. It had been about one ordinary person on one ordinary road making one ordinary decision to stop when stopping was right. And that was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be enough, because the world does not change through grand gestures made by extraordinary people. The world changes through the 10,000 small, unwitnessed moments when an ordinary person looks at something wrong and decides, with no audience, no guarantee, no certainty of outcome, that they are the person who is going to do something about it. Carson Ward had been that person on County Road 7. And from that single decision, everything else had followed. The woman saved the network. Broken, the sheriff arrested the commissioner, charged the granddaughter, protected the farm, secured the ground, added the debt, repaid in a currency that would outlast any amount of money. All of it downstream of one farm boy who almost kept driving and didn't.